Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stormkeep. My name is Paul, and today we're going to talk about how to counter Blades of Khorne. They are one of the stronger armies in the game right now, and we thought we'd do an episode about it because they're different enough from Ironjawz. They are a melee-focused army, but they have enough going on in terms of trickery that it's worth doing a video about it. And joining me on the podcast today to talk about how to beat Khorne, we've got.
Hey, it's John.
Hey, this is Mergonk.
Hey y'all, it's David, son of Dracothian, coming in to help y'all out.
Before we talk about how to counter Blades of Khorne, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Kaiju Gaming Lounge. They stock our merch. You can see we have some fancy Stormkeep dice, as well as these extra fancy 9-inch, 7-inch range markers. So if you're playing Annihilators, especially if you saw our last video, you know how great Annihilators are. Being able to drop units in 7 inches away in style is a pretty cool thing to do. Kaiju Gaming Lounge is located in Orlando, Florida, and they have 15% off all Warhammer. So thank you very much to Kaiju Gaming Lounge for sponsoring our show, and let's talk about killing some cannibals. This video series here is called How to Counter Everything. We've been doing it for a little while in the podcast. I think our first episode was about how to counter Be'lakor, and unfortunately that video has not aged well because it was about a very specific version of Be'lakor that doesn't exist anymore. And we kind of knew that would be the case when we made that video, but we want the rest of these videos to be more evergreen. You know, like somebody watching how to counter Ironjawz or how to counter Tzeentch today is still going to get a lot out of that video, and hopefully still get a lot out of it whenever the rules change in the next edition. What we focus on with this series is looking at popular and powerful lists or just factions in general in the tournament scene. Sometimes factions are mono-build armies, which means, there's one competitive build and that's what everybody's using, so that's pretty easy to talk about. Like, for example, if we did how to counter Ossiarch Bone Reapers, we'd talk about the version that has, Catacross and Arcan and a bunch of Immortus Guard. Like, we wouldn't necessarily focus on units like the Mortek Crawler or the Harvester. That's just not something that people use very frequently. We take a look at these armies or lists, we look at what makes them strong, we look at why they might be popular, we look at what they're trying to do, how they approach the battle. Then we discuss their limitations, their weaknesses, and how you, as their opponent, can exploit these limitations and weaknesses. And we don't try to focus on like an exact list, like we won't present you with a 2,000 point, this is the army we're talking about, this is how you counter this specific army, because the rules and points change so often in this game, it's not really worth doing that, right? Like, 3 months from now, when this video is done, there's another battle scroll. 10-point difference on one unit can completely change a list, or like a core rule changes, like lookout cert changes, and all of a sudden you just deal with armies differently. What we will do instead, though, is suggest general strategies for how to beat these armies. We're going to examine all the different units that make them good, different combinations of units and abilities that make them good, and then we're going to also look at specifically what units and tactics Stormcast players can employ in order to counter these lists. Let's take a look at the Blades of Khorne as a faction. So their identity, the narrative hook here is that they are empowered cannibal hordes and armored elites with lots of bonuses to attack, hit, wound, and rend. So you've got, pretty average fighters that just get buffed up through just blood rights and worship through battle, and they become very scary when they have all of these buffs activated. They are primarily a melee army. However, this one actually has some serious ranged power to it. Between prayers and the skull cannons and a few whip attacks, they can actually have a decent ranged game. Like, you could make a semi-competent Khorne shooting list. It would probably lose to every other shooting list, but you can shoot things with this army. Khorne is the god of bloodshed and war. He doesn't care from where the blood flows. Friend and foe alike pay the blood tithe. Blood Tithe is a resource gained whenever you kill any unit on the battlefield, friend or foe. The Khorne player gets a Blood Tithe point, and this is the whole gimmick of the army. Managing this precious resource, using it wisely, this is how Khorne is going to win or lose the game. It's completely dependent on this mechanic. So Blood Tithe can be used to either summon more demons throughout the game, which makes it a really interesting melee-focused army that has a recursion element to it, which you don't really see very often. But you can also use these really, really powerful Blood Tithe effects. You can get things like a permanent army-wide +1 attack effect on every weapon in your army for the rest of the game. You can just move units in the hero phase with Murderlust, and this is probably what most people are going to lose the game to. I'm sure you guys can attest to that. This ability is crazy strong.
Yeah, so like Murderlust catches a lot of people off guard. It's really, really good with anything that can pre-game move. Khorne has like a Warcry Warband, I think, Claws of Karanak that normally moves 8 before the game begins. Then they move 8, or they run 14. and then they Murder Lust up to 22, and that Murder Lust sometimes can be in your turn to stop your movement. So if you don't account for this, your army will be stuck fighting some useless chaff turn 1 and not be able to get out of their deployment zone. And this just means more blood tithe and more time for Khorne, which is not what you want.
Yeah, Khorne is very much an army that wants to pick fights on its own terms. It wants to be the army that's charging. It wants to be the army that's murder lusting into range to stop you from moving. Because unlike other moves, this ability allows you to move within 3 inches of an enemy. So if you just run 6 forward and you have a reasonably good chance to murder lust within 3 inches, you're going to take it. And D6 sometimes is 1, but anytime I'm playing against it, it's a 6, right? So it's a very powerful ability. But the other really, really powerful ability you can do with Blood Tithe is to fight in the hero phase. And this extra activation of fighting is incredibly strong. This is usually what more advanced players will do to win the game. Like basic players will just tie you up and win through just stopping your movement with Murderlust. But the really skilled players are going to find ways to fight you in the hero phase, and that's how they're going to win the game. The fighting in the hero phase is absolutely bonkers. If you can clear yourself out of combat, you can get a whole bunch of... You can just get more Blood Tithe if you fight stuff in the hero phase and then use that to summon demons later. It's really, really strong to fight in the hero phase.
And that's something that's really interesting about them is they're kind of trying to start up this like perpetual motion machine, right? Where they're using all these little skills to tie you up, throwing out shit trap at you or crap chap at you that you're then killing, and they're getting more tithe to continue doing exactly off phase movement, off phase fighting, all these things that you can't predict and you don't want to have to deal with. And so it's interesting. You almost have to find ways to stop that machine from getting too efficient and rolling too fast down that hill, or else you're pretty done.
It definitely feels like a snowball army. Once they get ahead, they have all the tools they need to stay ahead. So it's one of the important things to counter it is to play carefully, not throw units away early, make sure they don't get off the ground too quickly. And there's other really good stuff you can do with Blood Tithe too. For example, just deny a spell anywhere on the table. Even if you have no units left in your army, you can just deny a spell, and that could, deny a battle tactic, which can win the game. I've seen that happen, not to me personally, but that is still a thing. You can also just drop meteors from the sky that deal mortal wounds from range, which are actually kind of scary because they can do up to 8 mortal wounds, which is pretty big. Their prayers are central. This is like the main prayer army. I know that, Stormcast use prayers, and we like our prayer, plural. We do have multiple prayers besides translocation. Daughters of Cain like prayers, Fire Slayers like prayers, but nobody likes prayers like Khorne does. Khorne has the best prayers in the game, and they're the only army now that can reroll them, aside from taking High Priest as a command trait. But every Khorne Priest can reroll. They can double the range of their invocations. None of this can be stopped by the enemy player because prayers, they're not like magic. They can't be interacted with. Very, very powerful mechanic. So let's just go over quickly what some of these prayers can do. So one of them is to force an enemy unit to move towards you. And again, that can be within 3 inches like Murder Lust. So you can do things like pull a unit towards you, get within 3 inches of it, and then use the Blood Tithe to fight in the hero phase. In fact, this is one of the more common combos that's going to win the game for the Khorne player when they pull it off, to pull a key unit in and get an extra hero phase worth of fighting. They can use their prayers to move in the movement phase. So for example, if their hero that's going to pull you is not in range to use that prayer, well, you just move that hero forward, then they pull you, then they fight you. It's a really powerful combination. Even just being able to move anything in the hero phase, that's an incredibly powerful ability. Seraphon players love this. Ironjaw's players love this. Any kind of extra movement, doubling your movement, tripling your movement in some cases, is really, really good. They can also just get straight up stat buffs, like getting +1 rend on all melee weapons or +1 save until your next turn. And these do stack with other effects. So for example, if you ally in a wizard, and there are ways to ally wizards into this army, you can get Mystic Shield and the Blood Prayer and All Out Defense. So you're starting to have like Stormcast levels of armor on some units, and that's very scary. Then there are powerful invocations that just run rampant on the battlefield, and your opponent cannot interact with them. Very few things in the game can stop a prayer, and these invocations, in addition to being almost impossible to stop, are very strong as well. All 3 of the invocations are good in their own way, and all of them are a threat. Now, they pay a high price for all these wonderful prayers. They don't have any spells natively. In exchange, they get an army-wide 5+ spell ignore, which is very good. then they can't be wizards. Khorne units can't have the wizard keyword. It's just these two things don't mix. You can bring some allied wizards. Like I said, Be'lakor is actually a pretty popular one. I think some people are even allying in Thedra from the Slaves to Darkness just to get an extra, Mystic Shield cast.
Also, that Gnarlwood Warband, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like the one that looks like a dark. Basically, any undivided wizards from Slaves to Darkness you can ally in, which is weird, considering like they specifically nerfed Arcane Tome for Khorne, but I guess they just missed that or they don't care. So.
Well, they had to nerf the Arcane Tome because if Bloodthirsters could take Flaming Weapon and actually do real damage, that was just too much.
Yeah, well, also Bloodthirsters with Mystic Shield and Bronze Flesh was a bit too much.
Bit much, yeah.
And doesn't their 5-up spell ignore also give them a blood tithe?
Oh, it does.
It does. Every time you successfully do that, it'll generate more blood tithe, which can be a real problem for games that are fun. Yep.
Yeah, it's like Null Myriad giving them a couple command points. It's a really extra feature.
It's actually a lot better because if you can collect enough blood tithe, you can increase that 5-up to a 4-up and then a 3-up if your opponent is mad enough to keep slinging spells and you keep rolling those spell ignores. So any army that's trying to sort of push through that 5-up may find itself on the back foot really fast based on how much resources they end up giving Khorne.
If you try doing Croak Celestial Deliverance into this army and they roll a bunch of 5-ups, you'll be real sad.
Oh. I had to not use a Comet recently in a sort of Comet Fall list that I've been playing around with because it just wasn't worth 5 or 6, potential 5-ups.
Yeah, I used to bring Horrorghast, and I basically would never cast that against Khorne. It's just way too risky. You'll be triggering that on their whole army.
Now, that is to say, despite all this army's power, it is a high skill cap army. If you're looking for an army that's very simple to play, that's just going to move forward and hit stuff, this is not the right army. This is a very complex army to play. You have very specific buffs from very specific heroes that need to be in very specific positions, and enemies, reasonably should be able to predict this and play around it. And it's all predictable, right? There's nothing like crazy that this army can do that you can't predict. Like there's no teleporting, there's no reserves. Everything this army does is telegraphed, or at least reasonably telegraphed. Like, yeah, they can Killer Instinct and make any unit move in the hero phase, but when those units only move 5 or 8 inches, it's not the end of the world. That you can reasonably predict where they finish these moves.
One could say that Khorne used to be this like from the 2nd edition book. It used to be this weird like 40 chess, like you have to know your trigonometry and like high math and lots of calculus, and get your compass out to determine their ranges. That was that kind of army. They have simplified a lot of aspects to it, but this is one of those things that has a low floor, high ceiling. You could play this army like Ironjaws. Like you could just buff a unit up to high hell, have Murderlust or some other like Blood Tithe in the bank, have Murderlust in the bank, have Killer Instinct as a prayer, have Bronze Flesh, have the Unholy Flames, and just send a unit out, send a Bloodthirster out 24 inches and just try to kill something, just smash. You could have that playstyle as a beginner, but more advanced players get a lot of mileage out of this book by not doing the just straight up Ironjaws, like get in your face and smash. They play this army in a very surgical way. And that is what catches people off guard. Like Khorne is actually a pretty surgical army when it wants to be.
Yeah, and it's heavily punished if it doesn't play that way. Because this army, if it gets charged by enemies, like if it can't control the flow of combat, shooting is a big problem as well, but if it can't control the flow of combat, it really struggles to punch its way out of melee, right? There's no like reactive abilities you can use in the combat phase in order to swing things in your favor. There is a strike first effect, but it is very limited. It's not like they have crazy high defenses for the most part. A lot of the key hammer units are 4-up saves. The bravery's not the greatest. They use a lot of command points, but they don't generate any extra. And if all their support heroes start dying, like a bunch of 5-inch move units are not a threat in this game. So it's very important you play this carefully. Everything in the army except for the Juggernauts and Bloodthirsters, everything's slow. And then everything except the Juggernauts and Blood Warriors is fragile. Like everything just dies as soon as it takes damage. That could be part of your strategy as the Khorne player because you get Blood Tithe from everything dying. But because this army is also expensive, like the units just cost a lot of points, and because you need to bring so many support units, you're paying like 600, 700 points in support in some lists, and then you only have like 1,300 points left to actually play the game with. Like,
actually, most lists will bring about 400 to 600 in just support. You need a Secrator. You need a Secrator to have your units be sort of somewhat resilient to shooting damage, especially because while this army has a lot of tricks and it can become good in combat, it needs a lot of support to do so. The units that are sort of independently good in combat, like Skullreapers, they're insanely expensive, and so you want things to help them last. So you need a Secrator, you need at least 2 priests. You preferably need like a Bloodthirster, either for damage or for utility. You want to get into combat as reliably as possible. And those points add up. And so, yeah, like Paul said, this army is pretty elite. And in order to get the maximum amount of damage that Khorne wants to do, it needs a lot of things to sort of come together. It's not like Stormcast levels of, okay, this unit can just independently take out another unit.
Yeah, because everything is also low damage, right? On its own, nothing in this army does particularly good damage. The highest, the biggest threat is like Skullreapers if they're reinforced. But even then, they're not that scary without buffs, right? There's no way to gain bonuses to wound. Hit bonuses are relegated to all-out attack, which can be stopped. They're only rend 1 baseline, so without bonuses to rend, without bonuses to movement, they're not even charging. Without bonuses to save, they just die in droves. Like, this is a very, it's like an elite horde army, which is weird. It has like units of 10 and 15 or 20, but then it's also like weirdly elite at the same time. It's hard to describe until you've seen it across the table. So I would say Khorne is definitely not, I would not recommend Khorne for beginners. If somebody's learning how to play the game, I would point them towards something like Slaves to Darkness. I think that army is a lot easier to pick up. To get the minimum amount of success with Khorne, I think you have to be a more skilled player. But really, really skilled players can get a lot of mileage out of this book. And that's why you see it doing so well in GTs right now. It's a very high risk, high reward play style.
The other thing to note is this army also tends to be really swingy. There is a certain playstyle that revolves around Bloodthirsters, and while they are, you could say, somewhat unreliable and low damage when you think of like a 320, 310 point unit. If your opponent is really good at rolling 6s, it's weird that you have to account for that, which a possibility that may just never happen, but if it happens, it's absolutely backbreaking. So it makes it very difficult to sort of position against this army sometimes.
Let's take a look at their battle traits. So first up is the Blood Tithe, like we said. Anytime a unit's destroyed, friend or foe, Khorne gets a Blood Tithe point. And they can spend those at the end of the hero phase for very powerful bonuses. Now, this timing is very important as we discuss how to counter this army. Remember that Blood Tithe is spent at the end of the hero phase in particular. Alternatively, you can spend it at the end of your movement phase in order to summon more demons, which is very useful, honestly. Like, having access to just one of these would be good, but the fact that you can have both, or not both at the same time, but one or the other, that kind of flexibility, I think, is one of the reasons this army is so strong, because sometimes you want to fight in the hero phase, sometimes you just want to reload and summon 20 Bloodletters onto the table. The Locus of Fury, it gives all Khorne demons a 5-up award while there are no enemies within 8 inches. This is any enemies for any reason, so let's say you're shooting at them from 30 inches away, and you have nothing near them, they're going to have a 5-up ward. But if you move a unit within range, within 7 inches, let's say, and then you shoot them, they won't get the ward anymore. So it's not the attacking unit that they have a ward against, it's just they have a ward in general unless something enters 8 inches. However, if a Khorne demon retreats, they lose this ability for the rest of the battle. So they really need to make sure they pick their fights properly, because they are punished heavily for retreating. This army has no sources of retreat and charge, I believe. So once you're stuck in, you really want to be in there. And there's plenty of bonuses for charging too. So this army wants to dictate how the charges go. While Khorne demons get a 5-up ward, Khorne mortals, the bloodbound units, anytime they're slain by a melee weapon, you can pick an enemy unit within 3 inches and you make a murder roll, which is like Blaze of Glory, except it's not based on the wound characteristic or anything. It's just make 1 dice roll, and on a 5-up, it takes a mortal wound. A bloodbound hero makes 3 murder rolls instead of 1, so if you kill a hero, there's a chance you can take 3 mortal wounds. Also, Blood Warriors on their War Scroll have an ability that makes them give an extra murder roll, so they are just doing a lot of reflective damage. We'll talk about them later. We talked about the 5-up spell ignore. That's called Hatred of Sorcery. And like you said, John, when somebody ignores a spell with this ability, they do receive a Blood Tithe, which is crazy acceleration. So eventually people just stop casting spells into Khorne. And attack bonuses. This is not an explicit ability, but it is a big feature of this book is that there are many sources of +1 attack effects, and all units in the book are written with these in mind, right? Because if you can just give a unit +3 to attacks with the Bloodsecrator, with Wrathmongers, and with the Blood Tithe ability, that means any unit in the game can have a tremendous boost to their output. So everything starts weak, right, and then gets buffed up to crazy heights. But even just having one of these is usually enough for the Khorne player to reach that like critical mass of damage needed. And typically it'll be the Bloodsecrator who has a once per battle table-wide, all Blades of Khorne units get +1 attack this combat phase. That usually spirals them into using Blood Tithe for 8 points to get +1 attack permanently, unless they need something else at the time. But yeah,
I've never actually seen that one used.
It's
I'll be honest.
Yeah,
like
usually
it's I would say like a Khorne player that most Khorne players I know love doing Murderlust. They love fighting, and they love they love like summoning 5 Fleshhounds or 10 Bloodletters like mid to late game. I think you will rarely find them using this buff because by this time either their army is completely dead to where this is not going to matter, and they'd much rather Murderlust for more movement with their limited amount of units. Or they like to fight in the hero phase, so their movement phase is then freed up. So I wouldn't worry too much about this, even though it is good. I mean, in a slog out match against, I don't know, Soul Blight zombies, it could be really good.
No, absolutely. The Bloodsecrator is the main one. Wrathmongers don't really see a lot of play because they're slow, and you have to stay
And
holy within
the
8
range
inches.
is so limited, yeah.
Yeah, but the Bloodsecrator, he's great because he also brings a 4-up rally for Bloodbound units, so he's pretty good. But no, that's a great segue into just looking at all the Blood Tithe effects because, like I said, these are the main feature of the army. Understanding what these effects do, what they cost, and just knowing, oh, my opponent's at 4 Blood Tithe going into the next turn. That means he can fight me in the hero phase. I really don't want that to happen, so I'm going to make sure I don't finish a turn within 3 inches of him. That way he can't fight me. But yeah, let's take a look at these. It is worth noting that these effects are repeatable and they stack for the rest of the game. So, for example, if you use Rising Hatred, which adds 1 to Hatred of Sorcery, which is the spell ignore, that's the whole battle, and you can stack that. So you can eventually have a 1+ spell ignore. You just literally ignore every spell cast on you and generate a tithe. But let's take a look. Murderlust costs 1 point. This is the main one. Khorne is going to use this most of the time. Murderlust allows a unit to move d6 inches in the hero phase, and that's incredibly strong. If you do it in your turn, it's just extra movement, extra little bits of repositioning. You can tie things down. You can prevent enemies from redeploying. If the Khorne player does it in the enemy turn, well, suddenly units that were about to start a move, well, now they have an enemy within 3 inches and they can't move. If they're shooting, they have to shoot at that unit or they have to retreat. And effectively, you've just wasted that unit's shooting. Murderlust is the main way Khorne wins games. It like the whole army is balanced around Murderlust. It's a very strong ability. The only downside of Murderlust is that if you use Murderlust, you can't use anything else that turn. Right? You're dedicating an entire Blood Tithe potential turn to just Murderlusting 1 to 3 units. You can Murderlust 3 times in the same hero phase. That's the highest opportunity cost. It's not really the tithe. Like, you're going to have the tithe for this every turn. It's really just the fact that you are not using another ability, like, for example, Apoplectic Frenzy, which allows you to fight immediately. That's the main trade-off here. For 2 Blood Tithe, Khorne can do the Spell Eater Curse, which just automatically unbinds a spell. This is done reactively when an opponent uses a spell, so it's not done at the end of the hero phase, but if you use this, you can't spend any at the end of the phase, and I believe the way it's worded, you can just use this multiple times. There's no limit on how many times you can use the Spell Eater Curse in a single phase, so if you have 8 Tithe, you can unbind 4 spells, guaranteed. I could be wrong about that one.
It's also so powerful in this season, right? Like this General's Handbook, because, there's 2 battle tactics that require you get off a spell, and if you're playing Khorne, you're just not going to try those, because if they're able to use this, they only need 2 tithe, right? There's only 1 turn in the game that they're not going to probably have 2 tithe, depending on even what their loadout is. They might come with some, and like it's a real it's a real difficult thing to come up against, and basically have to scrap those 2 battle tactics if you're, depending what kind of army you are, and if you have a lot of wizards.
For 3 Blood Tithe, they can drop a meteor on you. They can pretend to be a Stormcast player for a turn. They can pick an enemy unit anywhere on the table and roll 8 dice, and each 5-up deals a mortal wound. And these become 3-ups instead if the unit has 10 or more wounds as a characteristic, or it has 10 or more models. So almost nothing in the Stormcast list will get triggered by this, which feels nice, frankly. But against most armies, this is like roll 8 dice, 3-ups or mortals. And it's very, very strong into those armies. If there's a specific unit that the Khorne player is trying to destroy, for example, a general on like a mount or something, and that's like to get a grand strategy, they're just trying to keep their general alive. Well, the Khorne player could just whip meteor after meteor at them until they're dead.
Yeah, I've seen it used mainly as a finisher. Like if they can't, if they have nothing worthwhile in combat that they can do the 4 Blood Tithe on, and let's say you have an Ironclad or like a Krondys or something that's struggling on like 3 or 4 wounds left, they will absolutely trigger Brass Meteor. Because, it happens. Like, Ironclads have a 3-up save. They save stack to, like, a 1-up sometimes. If they have an Ironclad just limping on 2 wounds, they'll trigger Brass Meteor and finish it off.
Yep. It's good ability. Apoplectic Frenzy is the most important one that you need to know how to play against. It costs 4 Blood Tithe, and it allows a Blade of Khorne unit within 3 inches of an enemy unit to fight immediately. That means pile in and attack. So when these units have, 2-inch or 3-inch range on some of their weapons, that becomes even scarier. We'll talk a lot about how to counter this one in particular. This is a very important one to know.
Mm-hmm.
For 5 Blood Tithe, they can do Rising Hatred. We've talked about this one. It adds 1 to the spell ignore for the rest of the battle. This is almost never cease play. Even into armies like Seraphon, which are trying to kill you with mortal wounds, you probably won't spend your Tithe on this. You'd rather just fight them or Murder Lust or something. Because it just takes too long to get it up to anywhere like a 3-up or a 2-up. By the time you spend a 10 Tithe on it, you could have Murder Lusted a bunch and then fought in the hero phase a few times.
It's good against some armies that do magic really well, but are also like tar pity as, just massive tar pits. So like, namely Soul Blight, which can actually do pretty decent magic. It can be good against them because you'll be stuck fighting zombies for like God knows how long. The other army this can be good against is Tzeentch. Particularly because Seraphon has other ways of doing damage, and they have like low stats, so you can just like Murder Lust up to them and like start killing them. But Tzeentch likes to target you with, like a Khorne Spine or like Pink Horrors, and then just sling spells at you. And if you can get this off against them, the game is practically over.
Mm-hmm. Once this gets to a 3-up, 2-up, 1-up, the Tzeentch
Even
player
a
runs out of
4-up.
tools.
Yeah, even a 4-up. Tzeentch is typically slinging 9 spells a turn. If they do this and they like to put out that free endless spell, oh my god, if they do that against you, the game no Tzeentch player would, but if they do, yeah.
Yeah, if I was Khorne, I would just walk into range of every endless spell.
Yeah, absolutely. Put my entire army in range turn 1. Or you have a free chaos spawn, guess what? That's more Blood Tithe for me.
Yes.
I really like the Rising Hatred ability because it's a bit of an opportunity cost there, right? Like as a Khorne, if you're a Khorne player, you kind of don't want to start getting it down to a 4 or a 3 or a 2, unless of course you're playing Tzeentch or an army like where you need it in that moment, because you kind of want them to be taking the risk, right? When it's a 5, I might, playing against Khorne, I'm going to take that risk a couple times, right? As it starts getting lower, I'm going to basically just not take the risk and not cast spells. So for armies like, Stormcast, where if we're put in a situation where we can't cast spells anymore because that, the Rising Hatred has gotten so low, and that's not really going to be very effective because we don't rely on our spells. So it's got that interesting opportunity cost where, like, against us and quite a few of the other armies, probably majority, there isn't a point of using this one. So it is really specialty in its sort of niche of how it plays.
Oh yeah, if the Khorne player wastes 5 Tithe doing this against me when I'm playing Stormcast, that's the best game ever. Like, I'm not going to lose that game. it's going to be real easy. Heads must roll. For 6 Tithe, you can give all of your units +1 rend with melee weapons for the turn. This one is not a permanent effect, it's just for the turn. This is often overlooked because most of the time you'd rather just fight in the hero phase with the Apoplectic Frenzy. +1 rend, though, is pretty... It's important as a tool to have in your arsenal because you can stack it with a prayer to get +2 rend for one unit, And then you have like Rend 3 on Skullreapers, and that's just terrifying. This can be key into certain matchups, like Slaves to Darkness or Stormcast, who are trying to armor stack away from your Rend potential. This is usually not used, but it's a good tool to have, kind of like Rising Hatred. You know, it's a toolkit thing. It's better to have it and just know that it's there. Let the blood flow. Each enemy unit within 3 inches of a Blades of Khorne unit takes D3 mortal wounds if you roll a 2-up. So this is just bad, right? Like, it's just bad. I've never seen anybody use this.
Wait, heads must roll?
No, let the blood flow.
Let the blood flow. No, yeah. Honestly, like, I would have expected this to be like a 2 like blood tithe ability. Like, it's weird that this is happening at 7. Like, how many units could this possibly affect? 3? You're talking about like 6 mortal wounds? Really? For 7 blood tithe? Like, Brass Meteor is way better than this.
Meteor is better. Frenzy is better. This is just bad.
This is like 7 is not Khorne's number. They're like, oh, this is the Nurgle number, so let's just give them that. This is basically what's weird is this is Nurgle's ability in Slaves to Darkness.
Yeah, it's quite peculiar.
Yeah, so they were just like, nah, just give them the Nurgle ability because Khorne doesn't like 7.
And then for 8 Tithe, you can do Slaughter Triumphant, which gives you +1 attack with all melee weapons for the rest of the game. And that's really good.
You're not gonna do this. It's like, unless you're playing a 4,000 point game, you're not gonna do this.
It's not the most efficient use of Tithe, right? Most of the time,
I'd rather just summon more units because that's more attacks that I'm getting.
Yeah, and you refund some of the Tithe that you spend if those units die.
Yep.
Yeah. Summoning. Let's talk summoning. So, like most armies, you set up more than 9 inches from all enemy units. You have to set up wholly within 8 inches of a Khorne hero or 16 inches of the Skull Altar, which is their terrain piece. So these are some important summoning things that I noted here. For 3 Tithe, you can summon a priest, which is awesome that you can just summon heroes in. I'm sure that'll be handy. Or just 5 Flesh Hounds. It's a cheap screen. It unbinds. It adds 2 to charge rolls. So you're looking at a 7-inch charge every time. 5 Flesh Hounds are really
have
good.
A decent amount of attacks if you're just after like light chaff or like, you know, low wound count 4-up save units. They can actually do some damage.
Yeah, Flesh Hounds are no joke. They're a decent summon. For 4 points, doesn't matter. You're not going to do it. Skullmaster's not good. For 5 Tithe, you can summon a Skull Cannon, which is great. Summoning and shooting is really, really good.
Great, yes.
10 Bloodletters. Most people aren't going to summon 10 Bloodletters because you'd rather pull that Tithe for 8 and then you summon 20 Bloodletters.
Oh no, you might summon 10. Like sometimes, like I've seen a round 4, round 5, 10 summon Bloodletters taking away an objective because they summon it on the objective. You know.
Yeah, sure.
It's very situational, but yes, like obviously, if you have 8 Blood Tithe, you're not going to do Slaughter Triumphant. 20 Bloodletters is an amazing thing to summon.
Yeah, and if you're gonna summon 10 models and you don't have the Tithe for 20 Bloodletters, you'd summon 10 Flesh Hounds for 6 if you could, right? Because they get +2 to charge, and that helps them steal objectives. And then for 10 points, you can summon any Bloodthirster keyword unit, except for Skarbrand, obviously. And that is, not great. But if you summon, for example, a Bloodthirster of Unfettered Fury in the charge phase, he can give a unit 3d6 charge with Beck in the Hunt. And that can surprise people. That kind of threat range is surprising. Yeah.
Movement will swing games late game when nearly everything is dead or something. If it's like a stalemate or something.
Mm-hmm. That extra little bit of movement is key. This army is all about movement tricks, which is weird. All right, let's take a look at some commonly used command traits before we look at the specific units that we're going to talk about today. Just to give you some context for what these units are capable of doing. So, for example, when we talk about a Bloodthirster of Unfettered Fury, we're usually going to assume he's taken the Firebrand command trait, which makes him a priest, because that is just incredible value in this army. Being able to bloodbind with him on the front lines is really, really useful. So that's probably the most commonly used command trait you'll see. Some other less used command traits are Embodiment of Wrath. This one is for a demon hero. This is if you're playing a Bloodletter spam list, like you have tons and tons and tons of Bloodletters, because at the start of your hero phase, you get on a 2-up, you get to revive D3 models from every Bloodletter host wholly within 6 inches. And this is really useful because demons can't use 4-up rally like the Bloodbound can. So this helps you just replenish your forces. And remember, every Bloodletter is 2 wounds. So this is like reviving either 2, 4, or 6 wounds from every unit within range. This isn't a command ability. This doesn't preclude you from rallying afterwards, so you can rally first and then do this, which is great. Unlike rally, this can be used in combat, right? Which is really strong if you're just.
It's like that prayer. You can combine this with the prayer on the Master on Throne to return even more, like I think D6 models.
Yes, yeah. So if you're playing against somebody who has like 2x20 Bloodletters, they might take this command trait. It's pretty rare, honestly. It's not very common because just getting another priest in your army is very good.
I mean, sometimes you see like what's the Bloodletter host called?
The Bloodlords.
Bloodlords, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll see like 40 Bloodletters, and you'll see like a Bloodmaster on Skull Throne, sort of like in a central position, just reviving units from models from all units, or because this revives like everything, Flesh Hounds if it wants to.
Nope, just Bloodletter.
Is it only Bloodletter?
Bloodletter host in particular, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
So just cool, just Bloodletters then. Cool.
Yep. The other one you might see sometimes is the High Priest of Khorne. This is a Bloodbound specific command trait. People will typically use a Demon General. There's no downside to mixing Mortal and Demon together, so they'll use a Demon General, but sometimes they'll use a Bloodbound one, and they might take this to make their priest chant 2 prayers instead of 1. Obviously, this isn't as useful as just getting another priest in your list, because when you have another priest, that means you're learning another prayer. This one this doesn't teach you another prayer. This just allows you to chant another one. But what this does let you do is things like, chant your War Scroll prayer and then use a scripture prayer and then use an invocation. And you can always take a prayer enhancement. It is very useful, yeah.
Because if we're talking about things like the Bloodmaster, I believe, I think, I can't remember what prayer they have, but I believe it lets you fight. What does it let you do?
The Bloodmaster adds 1 to wound rolls against enemy units.
Yeah. So that's pretty. Like you might want to do that with a Bloodmaster. You might want to do Killer Instinct and add 1 to wound rolls or something.
Unfortunately, he's demon, so he can't do that. This is just for Bloodbound heroes.
Oh, okay. So I guess you might want to just do the Slaughter Priest thing, which is Blood Boil, I think.
Yeah, just D6 mortal wounds.
Yeah.
Or you can do the Realm Gore Ritualist -1 attack, or you can do. No, I guess you can't take it on Drom, so it doesn't really matter. But
yeah, you can't take it on Drom, but Blood Hex is good. Like I've seen this being used on the Realm Gore Ritualist, like -1 attack, and you pull them towards you with Bloodbind.
The prayers are so good in this army. You want to chant all of them every turn.
Oh yeah, seriously, this army loves its priests.
Yeah. Let's talk artifacts. There's 2 artifacts you need to care about. Both of them go on demons. None of the mortal ones are worth talking about. The first one is called Argath, the King of Blades. If you are within 3 inches of an enemy, nobody can use ward rolls. In some matchups, it's totally useless, right? Like even disabling a 6-up ward is not the most useful thing. But in other matchups, it's like, oh, cool, you have a 4-up ward or a 5-up or something. It's gone. Incredible. Just kills Gotrek, right? Khorne just murders Gotrek anytime they have this artifact. It is worth noting that you have to be within 3 inches to disable wards. And, if you're using range damage like skull cannons or prayers, that stuff happens before you charge into melee. But you could use Bloodbind and Murderlust to pull an enemy within 3 inches, disable its wards, so that when your prayers and skull cannons connect, they don't get warded off. Pretty gross. Pretty strong artifact. Usually goes on the Bloodthirster in the army. The other artifact you'll see is the Halo of Blood, which is all the time fight first on a demon unit. This will frequently go on a Bloodthirster, either the Insensate Rage or the Unfettered Fury, and we'll talk about the distinction between those two. But it also sometimes just goes on a Bloodmaster, because the Bloodmaster, when he fights, he can pull in 20 Bloodletters to fight at the same time. So anytime he's fighting first, they're fighting first as well, which is incredibly strong. Like if you ever charge into a Bloodmaster while he has a pack of Bloodletters around, you've probably just lost the game, because that fight first is going to hurt.
Well, people also I've seen this used a lot in Paul mentioned a Bloodthirster, because oftentimes what they'll do is they'll create like a small line of like a screen, like a Blood Reaver screen around the thing. So you come within 3 of it, and then it just fights first over their heads because it has like a 2-inch reach, and that can be backbreaking too. So the thing, it's a good thing to watch out for, because you might want to charge in a way where you're outside of 3, so the start of combat is sort of wasted for them.
Yeah. Now these artifacts are so good that sometimes Khorne will take both, right? They'll take a Warlord Battalion just to get both of these in a list. Usually what Khorne players do is they'll just try to have fewer drops, so they'll skip the Warlord entirely, or they'll go for the prayer enhancement just to have more options on what prayers they're chanting every single turn. So it's not common right now for them to take both artifacts, but these artifacts are so good that they might consider it. They're really, really strong artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk prayers, because these are the bread and butter. Between the Blood Tithe and the prayers, that's how Khorne wins games. So first up is Blood Sacrifice. It chants on a 4 and it only has a range of 8, but that doesn't really matter, because all it does is give you a Blood Tithe in exchange for dealing D3 mortal wounds to any unit. And it must deal D3 mortal wounds. So if there's no enemy units within range, you have to hurt one of your own units. It's usually the priest that's chanting it is going to do this, and then on the next turn, they're just going to heroic recovery to get those wounds back.
Yeah, like this is not a problem for them. Like this is a prayer you'll always find in Khorne. Like always assume they have one Blood Tithe because they reroll all their prayer rolls because of their training piece.
Yeah, this is a 4-up reroll, 75% chance. It's much more likely to go off than not. Just assume every time the Khorne player's turn starts, they gain a Blood Tithe.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is Blood Bind. It chants on a 3, and it has a range of 16. You have to pick an enemy within range, not wholly within, and that's a really important part for this prayer. That unit can't be in combat, and it must move 8 inches towards the chanter. So they can pull units within 3 inches, and then fight you with using Blood Tithe to do Apoplectic Frenzy. They can pull screens out of the way and then do flying charges with Bloodthirsters. They can pull things towards the front line so that when they charge in, you're going to be within range to fight them. I think this is the strongest prayer in the book. Personally, that's just
the best prayer they have. Yep.
Yeah,
I would say like if I had to make an argument, I would say the prayer that's further down the list, 4th on the list, is probably, in my opinion, a little bit better, based on what I've seen Khorne players do. But let's just like go on with the other prayers, and we'll talk about something else.
Yeah,
so.
This one's just so disruptive, and when it goes off, it can be game winning.
Yep.
Bronze Flesh, nice and simple. Blades unit adds 1 to save rolls until your next hero phase. This does stack with every other source of save bonuses. Cover, Mystic Shield, Finest Hour, all out defense. Stick this on some Blood Warriors. They are not taking any damage unless it's Ren 2, and even then, with their 20 wounds, they're pretty tough, even just a 10-man squad. So
yeah, plus they're doing more wounds to you when you like fight them based on their they have like permanent Azerite Halo and murder rolls. So
yep. Or let's say it's time to send in your Bloodthirster into combat. Your opponent's going to try to kill them immediately, so you preemptively put Bronze Flesh on the Bloodthirster before you send them in. So deceptively good prayer, because Khorne is not a particularly durable army, but being able to focus durability at particular units at particular times is really good. Killer Instinct. This is definitely in competition with Bloodbind for the best prayer in the game. It's up there with like Translocation on how good these two prayers are.
Yeah, this is like, y'all remember Stormdrake Guard when they came out? Imagine them doing this with 1 unit every turn.
Every single turn with any unit in the army. A Blades unit can just make a normal move. This, especially when you combine it with things that allow you to run in charge or run 6 in charge, and then have a 3d6 charge and Murderlust, this is probably why Khorne is a 5-inch move army, because they know everybody's just going to double it with Killer Instinct.
Yep, and this is why you see a lot of like Bloodthirster YOLO lists where like Skarbrand or like a Bloodthirster moving 16 inches or 24 inches or something and just like yeeting them into the enemy army. The really scary thing with Killer Instinct is like Paul said, Bloodbind is super, super strong, but it is a 16-inch range. So you can, even if you map this out, you actually have to map it out with Killer Instinct in mind. So you have to imagine what they will do if they hero phase move another priest with a second priest, and then have the priest that just hero phase moved do Bloodbind to pull your unit in.
Yep. Now, that is an unreliable combo, let's say, because it requires rolling 2 3-up prayers. But you, the opposing player, have to assume they're going to make those rolls, right? You have to play around that possibility.
Yeah, because you'll lose a game instantly if they do this combo to you when you haven't accounted for that movement.
Yeah, it's like anytime you're playing against a unit that can run in charge, you want to assume it runs 6, while your opponent has to assume it runs 1. Like, it's just the difference in how you approach it, because the worst case scenario for you is that they run the max, and the worst case scenario for them is they run the minimum. So it's better to just play around the worst case scenario. Unholy Flames. It gives a Blades unit +1 Rend with melee weapons until your next hero phase. So even just boosting Rend 1 to Rend 2 is incredibly good on units like Blood Warriors and Skullreapers. Boosting a Bloodthirster up to Rend 3 and then sending it in, that can be very useful. Really strong. And it works even during your opponent's turn. So if you have a Halo of Bloodthirster, that's now Rend 3 until your next hero phase, fighting first all the time, that's pretty dang good. So all of these prayers are amazing. Khorne player, hopefully would want to chant all 5 of these every single turn. There is a 6th prayer that doesn't see a lot played because these other prayers are just so much more important to how Khorne plays. They're just phenomenal. Like,
Yeah, I want to make a general point about, all these prayers. They give me such like sort of like FOMO compared to a lot of prayers and spells in the game. It's the range. Like the range on these things is so significant. And especially, with what you're trying to do with Khorne, that it can be very effective because you can be far enough away. You're not trying to stick within a 12-inch bubble or a low casting spell range. You're really able to like be a bit further back or get these things off and not have to be right beside the troops you're trying to put them on and then let them go. So I think that part of the way that they wrote this, their prayer scriptures, is quite unique.
Yeah, now we do assume that they can reroll the prayers, but it's not going to be the case that you're within range of your skull altar all the time, while you're also being wholly within 16 inches of the units you want to buff. At some point, they're going to move away from that altar, and then all of these 3-ups suddenly feel way less reliable.
It's okay. It is difficult for them, but it is easier than people think. Like, there's a lot of like typically from what I've seen for whatever prayers they do need to get off, they're in range for the first, like, I want to say 2 to 3 turns. After that, it's like a crapshoot, right? But depending on what the board position is, what the deployments are like, what the battle plan is like. But assume they're going to have good amount of rerolls for at least the first 2 turns.
Definitely. And their blood sacrifice is going to always be near the altar. They're just going to keep him near there, sometimes even garrisoned, because he might be doing an invocation at you at some point too. All right, let's talk about specific units. We'll start with one of 2 like units that are actually going to do damage to you. I have said already that nothing in this army really does a lot of damage. It's kind of like everything combined together is enough to kill stuff, but individually each unit in this army doesn't do a tremendous amount of damage. There are 2 exceptions to that. I would say Bloodletters and Skullreapers. So there's 1 demon unit and one mortal unit you need to watch out for. Bloodletters are kind of the weirder of the 2. Because they are 20 wounds on a 5-up save. That means they have a lot of wounds and they're durable to mortal wounds, especially with their 5-up ward. They have the spell ignore as well. But as soon as they start taking high volume fire from things like Blissbarb Archers or Reavers or Tempesters, they just fall apart because their poor save just doesn't really go very far. If you can get around the ward, if you can get around the spell ignore, these guys are pretty easy to kill, especially in melee combat. Like, these guys just die in melee combat if you can get in there. If you can't, and they get to hit you first, like let's say they summoned in and they got a 3d6 charge and they're in your face, their max damage for 10 models is not that great. It's only 21 max damage on 3s, rend 1. Now, they do have hit 6 mortals, but those hit 6 mortals are not in addition, so they're just kind of like an accuracy boost, like long strikes with their headshots. It's not doing additional damage. It's still max 21 damage from this unit. Once you give it a +1 attack buff, though, all of these guys go up +1 attack, and they go up to 31 damage. It's a 50% damage increase. So these guys really want to pop off on the turn that you use your Bloodsecrator. You want to charge them in with a Bloodthirster who's going to fight first or disable wards, and then you have 10 or 20 of these guys going off and doing a tremendous amount of damage. Because they have 2-inch range, they always fight in 2 ranks, which makes reinforced units a good idea. +1 to charge all the time means even if you summon them, they have an 8-inch rerollable charge because you can always command point reroll. Yeah, they're one of the better damaging units in the army. But they are slow, like everything. If they don't have Killer Instinct to get an extra 5-inch move in the hero phase, if they don't have the 3d6 charge, they are not going anywhere that turn. And they're not typically included in lists unless you really lean into them. They're more of a summoned unit. Most of the competitive lists we're going to talk about are summoning Bloodletters into play. If you have like a 30 wound unit, you're not going to die to the Bloodletters. You're going to take out most 21 damage. They don't get rally bonuses, unlike the Bloodbound and with the Bloodsecrator. There's a lot of blood in this army. But there is a lot of revival that we talked about, like with the command trait, and the Herald on Bloodthrone can use his prayer to revive them. So they're kind of a weird. They're like, what else is there to say about Bloodletters? They do good damage. They have a high model count. Yeah, now you know. All right, moving on to Flesh Hounds. These guys are deceptively good They don't look it.
You will see them in every list.
They are in most lists these days, because it turns out that having a battle line 8-inch move wide screen that can unbind a spell, that's just a good thing to have, especially in Khorne, where you don't actually get a lot of unbinding, right? Bloodthirsters don't unbind on their own. None of the demons except the Flesh Hounds do. All you really have to rely on is Slaughter Priests, your heroic actions, and Flesh Hounds. So these guys are pretty important for that. Even just a naked unbind is really useful, because Khorne is an army that can chant the Hexgorger Skulls, which reduce enemy casting by 2 if they're nearby. So even a +0 unbind suddenly becomes a useful thing.
Yeah, and I think this season, Khorne is just even in a better season, because you can use these guys to go for unbinds and use your primal dice that you're not using to cast spells with.
Yep.
So that's like a significant advantage.
Oh yeah. Not to mention, like, these guys are on these small cavalry bases. If you turn these guys sideways and put them in, like, stretch the limits of 1-inch coherency, they cover a really, really wide area. Like, other than maybe Claws of Karanak, this is the unit that you're going to see that they push into your face turn 1 to deny you space, more or less.
Yeah. They're also weirdly good damage. They're not accurate, right? Their Bloodletters are, for example, 3/3 rend 1 with hit 6 mortals. These guys are just 3s and 4s. But they are the same max damage, roughly 20 max damage, which is pretty good. They do have a.
I mean, it's good for clearing screens, like if you don't want to waste like Skullreapers or something on it.
Now that said, they are fragile. 5 up save, 10 wounds per screen. They're not worth reinforcing because they're only 1-inch range, and the number of unbinds doesn't scale with unit size, so you'll usually just see them in squads of 5. And they have no rend, so the only damage they're going to do that's meaningful is to other screening units. So if they charge into your Tempesters or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. They're just going to bounce off them. You're okay. Let's talk about the Skull Cannon, which, until they changed Lookout Sir, this was looking to be an incredibly useful unit. Now it's just good. It's not incredibly useful. It's just good. And let's talk about why. Well, first off, it's reasonably fast for an artillery unit. Moving 8 inches is pretty good. It's reasonably durable for an artillery unit. 8 wounds on a 4-up save is also pretty good, especially since it's a demon. It does have Locus of Fury and Hatred of Sorcery to have ignores against it has wards and a spell ignore. And for its shooting damage is 4d3, which is somewhere between 4 to 12 damage. But it's on 3s rend 2. And demons can get +1 to wound rolls if you have the Bloodmaster targeting a unit. So what this unit is really good for is just shooting at screens, making room for your actual melee threats to charge in and get where they need to be. Before the Lookout Sir change, these guys were really hot because they could shoot heroes, and they would get +1 hit with Reapers of Vengeance, a subfaction, and that would counteract the Lookout Sir. And then every hero slain is another Tithe, so that's 1 on top of killing a unit, so that's 2 Tithe for every hero you slay. These days, it's really hard to pull that off because Lookout Sir exists and stops you from being shot for the most part. But these guys are still just good at shooting stuff. Like, for their point cost, Skull Cannons still are a threat, and the fact that you can summon them for Tithe is also really good.
Mm-hmm.
And what puts them over the top, I think, is that once they get into melee, they're not pathetically weak. Like, they're pretty bad, right? 4 damage on 3s rend 1. But if they slay any models, they can immediately shoot. So if you charge into a screen after shooting it, so you move up, you shoot the screen, you charge in, you hit the screen, if you kill any models, you just get to shoot again, which is just awesome. It's such a cool effect.
I mean, it's like, their attacks are basically, it's what you see on a 10. It's like the mob, which is, not that good because it hits on force, but you got 2 Bloodletters on there. If you can get 1 damage through to like a chaff unit and kill a single model, you immediately shoot, which is, for 140 points for a Skull Cannon? That's value.
Yep. Now, there are some downsides, right? Obviously, they're single, which means they can't be reinforced. So if you're taking them, they are minimum 1 drop in your list for each artillery. So if you bring 2 Skull Cannons, you're a minimum 2 drop list. Some lists won't care about that. They'll just go Warlord for more value, and that doesn't really matter. Shooting is only impactful if you bring a critical mass of range damage. Like, if you just bring 1 Skull Cannon and nothing else, it's probably not going to do much, right? Especially because it's D3 shooting. It just averages out okay, but it can swing low. And if you don't have things like Blood Boil or the Wrath Axe or another Skull Cannon to just pile more damage into things, then you may as well just not bring them at all. And the biggest downside, of course, is Lookout Sir. It prevents their support heroes from being shot, and this is the kind of unit that really wants to shoot heroes. Like, this profile is built to shoot down heroes. And unfortunately now they just can't do that for the most part. So let's talk Bloodthirsters. There are 4 of them. One of them is a named character named Skarbrand. He looks pretty different. The other 3 are kind of confusing, right? Like, if you're not familiar enough with the army, you might look at all 3 of these large winged bull demon things and be like, oh, well, what's the difference? How do I know them? So we're going to talk about their rules, but I also kind of want to give some visual cues for them. So first up is the Bloodthirster of Unfettered Fury. He's the most common one, right? Like, most lists are using this guy for 2 main reasons. One of them is he has a -1 hit aura. If you're within 8 inches, you have -1 hit, and it also just does mortal wounds to you every turn, which is scary. But the real big reason is that he gives any Blades of Khorne unit in the charge phase a 3d6 charge. Now, he can't pick heroes, so you can't give it to another Bloodthirster. And this is not a command ability. It doesn't cost command points, so you can also re-roll that 3d6 charge. But
yeah, this is pretty good.
pretty good, especially when you combine it with Murder Lust and Killer Instinct. You get some crazy high threat ranges.
Not only that, but I don't know if you mentioned, they have a sub-faction called Skullfiends, which if you roll an 8+ on the charge, you get to fight first, meaning you can potentially activate 2 units in one go.
Yes,
And
this
is a unit to do it.
This combos very well with that. It also just works if you're summoning a unit into play. You can give it a 3d6 charge immediately, sometimes with +1, sometimes +2. Scary. This is the main reason people use this guy.
The question I have is can you magnetize these models?
Yes, you can. Okay, so the thing is, the Unfettered Fury has the 2-handed axe, so that's like harder to do because the arm bits are all the same. So if you can buy spare arm bits, it's easier to magnetize. Otherwise, like, you have to like do it between the Wrath of Khorne and the Unfettered Fury, because I think they both use like a whip or a flail. But it's fairly difficult because the models are like super spindly, so it's, I don't know. It's like there is a guide for doing it, but it's way harder than, say, like Dracothian Guard.
Yeah. The main model difference here is he's got a whip, and the whip has a chaos star at the end of it. It's a little weird that it's not a Khorne symbol and that it's a generic chaos symbol, but I guess this guy worships chaos in general. So what makes the Bloodthirsters good? Well, all of them are a fast unit, especially in this army. They are a 12-inch flying monster, monster being a very useful keyword for roar and stomp and things like that. He also has a shooting attack, which is weird, right? Like, he has a 43 shooting attack. It's on 3s, rend 1. It's not great, but it's better than not having one, I guess. And then their melee damage. 2 of the 3 Bloodthirsters are not particularly good in melee. They have 8 attacks that deal d3 damage each. Now, they are super accurate, right? 2s, rend 2 is about as good as it gets in this game, especially when you pump these guys up to rend 3, especially when you make them strike first with Halo of Blood. They can chop down weaker heroes, weaker units, things with fewer wounds pretty reliably, but they're not a hammer unit. They're not going to go and kill 60 zombies. They're not going to kill, 4 Tempesters with +1 save. They're not going to kill Karazai and things like that. Like, anything that's actually tough, they're going to bounce off.
Yeah, honestly, other than Skarbrand, I don't think any of the Bloodthirsters are particularly damaging unless you like swing really high and roll like a whole bunch of 6s or something.
Yeah, it's just that 2s and 2s is only a 69% accuracy. Rend 2 is not, it's not Rend Infinity. Like, the enemies will still get a save for the most part. And then on top of all that, you have D3 damage, right? So their damage is just so variable. They're not a reliable hammer. Even if they do average damage, they're just not that good either. What makes them good, though, is their buffs, the fact that they can take those really good artifacts, they can become a priest if they take the command trait. There's just a lot of utility wrapped up in these guys.
Yeah, like if you charge this unit alongside another unit that you gave a 3d6 charge to, like let's say you take 10 Skullreapers, now they charge maybe 10 inches, let's say on average, into an enemy unit, then you charge a Bloodthirster and after them, congratulations, if you're Skullfiend, you're now fighting first with the Skullreapers, then you activate the Bloodthirster. The Bloodthirster is also a monster, so they probably roared the opposing enemy unit for no all-out defense, and now you can just like add that bit of more utility damage to it. So, it works out in what the army wants to be doing.
Yeah. There are downsides, of course, every Bloodthirster. They are 16 wounds and a 4-up save, which is actually on the lower end of what you'd expect from a larger centerpiece model like this. You'd usually expect around 18 wounds. 4-up save is also not ideal. That means you can never save stacks at 2+. If high volume of fire, even on a 3+, can just kill you if you're not careful. They are heroes, obviously, so you do get to Finest Hour, you do get to Heroic Recovery. But in my experience, if you don't have the 5-up ward active, like if somebody gets close to you, Bloodthirsters just die. Even through Finest Hour, they can be killed. They're not particularly durable, I'd say. They are high accuracy, but they're low volume. So like I said, they're going to bounce off some things. They scale poorly with +1 attack effects, so even on the turn when you're popping the Bloodsecrator, he's barely doing any more damage. And he in particular can't get Beck in the Hunt. None of the heroes in this army can get 3d6 charges, and there's no way for him to run in charge, so he has a defined threat range of 12-inch move and a 12-inch charge, maybe +6 if you have a Murder List. But otherwise, you're not moving him that far. Let's talk about Wrath of Khorne first.
The walk.
Yeah, the walk Bloodthirster, as some people call it. So it's basically the Unfettered Fury Bloodthirster. It's almost identical, right? It has a shooting attack, which is equally bad. There's not enough difference to really talk about it. Melee damage is basically the same. You can take the same command traits, all the same stuff. Instead of having Beck in the Hunt for 3d6 charges and the -1 hit aura, he has Commander of Tyrants. When this unit fights, you get to pull another Bloodthirster into combat. So this is really good if you have him with the Halo of Blood and another Bloodthirster nearby, because both of them can fight defensively. They can both fight first, which is really good. Now, it should be noted that this doesn't work on another Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster, so you can't chain these into them. It also doesn't work on Skarbrand. And the other thing he gets is he can issue a command for free every turn, which is more useful than it seems, because this army uses a lot of command points, and it doesn't really have a way to generate extras. This is the only real command point efficiency. Despite all that, the Bloodthirster of Unfettered Fury is just better, right? Like, Unfettered Fury is so much better, it's crazy.
Yeah, this one feels like it was very much written for that one specific Khorne Legion, about the one that's like purely about making Bloodthirsters spammable or like better or whatever. I can't remember what the name is, Baleful Lords or something like that. But yeah, other than those, like even in those lists, I feel like I've seen Bloodthirsters like specific or like focus lists that still don't use this guy. His effect is just not good because Halo of Blood sort of already does that for you. And generally, if you were not killing something by activating a fight first Bloodthirster and a Bloodthirster right after that, you're probably not getting through whatever you were trying to get through. You're probably losing. So I don't actually see this used a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. You can do something fun here. If you have two of these guys and then two more Bloodthirsters, either the Fury or the Rage, you can fight first with a Halo of Blood, Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster, pull the Insensate Rage in, then it's your turn to pick a unit to fight. You pull in the other Wrath of Khorne Bloodthirster, who pulls in the fourth Bloodthirster. So you could, in theory, fight with 4 Bloodthirsters all at the same time on your turn. Not terribly useful, but it's a thing you can do.
Yeah, on an aesthetic note, I've always found this model to be like really janky and just sort of frustrating to look at. It's something that this era of GW did with these whips that I just don't really understand. Like they're trying to make it seem like it's in an action pose, but like it just does not seem right physics wise. And it's always just bothered me. So, I don't think I'd use this guy anyways, just even from that standpoint.
Oh yeah, the whip is janky. It breaks all the time. But the real sticking point on this model for me is the flaming jump. That does not look natural at all. It looks like he's stepping on fire.
Hilarious. It's hilarious and it breaks off. It's always just like shaking and ready to go.
All right, the third Bloodthirster with an even jankier model. Good lord. This is the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, and he is the damage Bloodthirster. He doesn't have any buffs. He doesn't care what the rest of the army is doing. He wants to hit things, and he's reasonably good at hitting things. And I have to quantify that, though. So first up, he does all the stuff the other Bloodthirsters do, right? Fast, flying monster, 16 wounds, has a spell ignore, has the ward, all the pros and cons. His damage, though, is where he shines. He is somewhere between 20 and 30 damage, so he hits like a unit of Bloodletters, but it's on 4s to hit and 2s to wound. So you give up -2 hit, which means you're always dedicating all out attack to this guy to be on 3s. The reason he hits on 4s, though, is because any wound roll of 6 causes 4 mortal wounds to each enemy unit within 8 inches. Which is when this goes off, it's devastating. Like, it just does so much damage. And
Yeah, to give you an anecdote about this, this was when the book just came out. We were at a local RDT, and and a friend of mine was playing, sort of like let me just YOLO a Bloodthirster into their face against Nurgle, and they had, a nice little Nurgle castle with 5 of wards up and everything. So he eats the Bloodthirster into it, gets all of his hits because he does all that attack. He rolls 3 6s. The entire Nurgle army took 12 mortal wounds, and after that, the Nurgle player quit and dropped out of the RTT. So it's that bad if they swing high on this.
yeah, and some people try to game it. They'll do things like they'll bring multiple Insensate Rage Bloodthirsters just to have more rolls at it. They'll try giving him more attacks. Wound rolls of 6 are rare enough that this guy doesn't really see that much competitive play. He's like a distraction Khorne effects, right? It's like you have to play around the worst case scenario. As the Khorne player, you assume he's going to do 0 mortal wounds, but your opponent has to assume he's going to do a lot. And they have to play around that possibility. Like, this guy has to die. So he's a distraction Khorne effects. This is a term from 40k where people will kill this thing even though it's not the highest. Like, you, the Khorne player, wouldn't consider this to be the most important thing in your army, but your opponent just really wants to kill it. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, Bloodthirsters aren't super durable, so when they do want to kill this guy, they will kill him, right?
Yeah, you should. If you're in melee with this guy and you get to strike first, I mean, unless they have Halo of Blood or something, but you should be able to kill this thing.
Yeah,
it's not the most durable thing at all.
And the argument is always, why are you using this guy instead of more Skullreapers or something? Like, they'll have more wounds, they'll have a better save, they'll have more damage output. You're using this guy because it's fun, right? Like, you're
fun, and it takes attention. It's okay. So, like, people use the term distraction Khorne effects, and while that is true in some aspects because it very much relies on wound rolls of 6s, it's something you can't ignore. It's like if I land, it's like, I don't know what the exact comparison would be, but like, Annihilators with shields aren't the biggest threat. You can pretty easily kill them. They're 9 wounds on a 2-up save. You can pretty easily focus some fire on them, kill them, but you can't ignore them because they'll just keep charging you otherwise.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. Actually, they're about the same damage output.
Basically.
Yeah, so he's a distraction piece. Your opponent has to waste attacks into him, and you can be advancing other game plans while you do that. And obviously, he's got the big 2-handed axe. That's how you know which model this is. He's got a big axe. Then let's talk Skarbrand, our little broken boy. He doesn't have the fancy wings. He just has the spines with tattered wings sticking out of him. Skarbrand is different from all the other ones in that he does great damage. He's one of the 3 main hammer units in this army. First one being Bloodletters, and the second one being Skullreapers, and the third one being Skarbrand. Skarbrand in particular is good because he just does mortal wounds, right? And it becomes a 1+. Like, it's automatic that he just does a lot of mortal wounds. His attack is called Carnage, which hits on a 4 normally. It doesn't hit, it's just an ability. If it hits you, it does 8 mortal wounds. And if he rolls a 6, it's 16 mortal wounds. But if he's enraged, which, the more damage he takes, the lower he gets on his table, it's a 1+. So he just walks into combat and guaranteed 8 mortal wounds. And you might think, oh, okay, I just won't hurt Skarbrand then, or I'll kill him. Well, if he doesn't fight in both combat phases, for the next round, he is enraged. He just always uses the bottom table. So what people will do with Skarbrand is, keep him back a turn, send some other stuff up turn 1, and then turn 2 Skarbrand's charging in. He always gets 3d6 charge. He moves 8. You'll Killer Instinct him for another 8. And then he has a 3d6 charge on top of that. So he is just a mortal wound machine. He's going to do a tremendous amount of damage. But that's all he is. He's just a beatstick. And he's an expensive beatstick. And he has the same durability as all the other Bloodthirsters, right? He's only 16 wounds on a 4-up. But unlike the other Bloodthirsters, he only moves 8 inches, not 12. And he can't fly, which means he can't jump over screens, and he can just get stopped by units between terrain. And this army in particular doesn't clear screens very well, right? People usually don't bring skull cannons. They don't bring prayers that do damage. So if all you're doing with Skarbrand is charging into screens, he's just going to die to a counterattack after that. So, yeah, he's got some problems.
He's very much a scalpel. It feels weird because he's this like mighty big monster. There's a lot of mortal wounds and does a lot of damage, but you need to know when and where to send him in. Yeah. Like we mentioned, Khorne's a surgical army, and you have to use this very excellent hammer unit that is fragile pretty surgically. It's weird. It feels like Annihilators almost, with Grand Hammers. If an Insensate Fury is Annihilators but shields, this is their Annihilators with Grand Hammer.
He is like reinforced Grand Hammers. That much risk reward. That's what Skarbrand is.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that one of the pros, in my opinion, is that Games Workshop released an incredible Primarch of Khorne Angron model, which very easily can be used as Skarbrand. It's the same base size. They look very similar. Their arms are actually interchangeable. If you can get other Bloodthirster arms, they fit on Angron, and you can get the second axe if you don't want to use his sword. And this is an incredible option because the Skarbrand model
it's a little aged.
A little bit old. It's a little bit aged, yeah. And the Angron one is just incredible, and you can there's a bunch of tech pieces you don't have to put on them.
There's for
great.
Those of you who are into 3D printing and play Total War Warhammer 3, there's a creator on Cults 3D that has made a very detailed print of Skarbrand from the Total War Warhammer video game. I think personally, if you print that to a high quality, that one is way better than the model that we're showing here. You could also use Angron. I know a lot of people who do.
You know what the weird part is? This is a 2015 model. This came out the same year Age of Sigmar started.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of models like that, Paul, that just don't sort of compare to what they're doing now. They've become a lot more bold in their design, and I partly think it's like the way they do poses and the way they do heroic scale.
I agree. It's the posing, it's the stance, it's the physics of how they're standing.
They've started realizing that having large models on just flat, empty bases without like some terrain added to the kit is just not good. They should do things that are more dynamic and cool looking. And this just looks like very flat for like what is ultimately like a great Bloodthirster of Khorne.
Well, it's probably because he wasn't designed for AOS. He was designed for fantasy.
Yes, he was probably designed for 40k first. That is correct.
No, Warhammer Fantasy. Even like he's.
Was this End Times?
Yeah. He was released either during the End Times or shortly after AOS started.
Oh, so was he designed for like a square base? That could be it, actually. Because if he needed to fit in that sort of like cube, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've heard that AOS, the decision to use round bases kind of came in pretty late in the design process, and that's why like Fire Slayers, for example, all look regimented, and why Magma Droths look like they should be on round or on rectangular bases, right? That everything was supposed to be regimented for a while. The decision came in pretty late in the design process, and when you have those like teeny tiny, let's call them undersized bases, right? That's what they were. Like if you put like a Necrosphinx, the old Tomb King model on the rectangular base, it hangs off every edge, right? Like everything was too big, and they couldn't really put more terrain on there and still fit the models on it. So I think maybe that's what was preventing them from doing these dynamic poses, was just the shape of the bases. But yeah, Angron's a sick kit. I would not be upset about facing Angron instead of a Skarbrand in AOS. Mm-hmm. Let's talk Khorne Mortals, and we'll start the discussion with the Blood Warriors, who are finally have a niche in this edition, right? Previous editions, they were kind of just another unit. Like I really like what this book did to give them a defined niche and how they approach battle and what they're all about. And it turns out that despite having, bare arms, these guys are still the tankiest unit in the second tankiest unit in the book. They have a 3-up save, even though you can see a bunch of flesh that you can hit, and they don't have shields, so Liberators are on suicide watch. But what makes Blood Warriors good? Well, they're durable. That's the main point. They're 20 wounds on a 3-up save per squad, and their damage is not terrible. It's not good, because they wound on 4s, but it's not terrible. They're 19 damage on 3s, 4s, rend 1, and 4 damage with the glaive on 3s, 3s, rend 2. Now, every time you can also choose to give them paired gore axes instead to give them +1 attack, or you can give them gore fists. And when you have the gore fists, every time they make a save roll of 6, they deal a mortal wound back to the attacker. And that's really the secret sauce with these guys, is that they do a lot of reflective damage. Every time they make a save roll, your opponent takes damage. Every time they die, your opponent takes damage. And they are tough. They're tough to shift too, so they're going to be fighting for a while.
Yeah, they are. This is the true anvil unit, and a funny fact about Gorfists, like that save 6 is an unmodified save 6. So let's say Blood Warriors have a 3-up save, your opponent hits you with 20 -4 rend 1 damage attacks. You still roll those 20 saves to see how many unmodified sixes you get to bounce mortal wounds back. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And then even if you start dying in melee, they start doing murder rolls, and those murder
And
rolls
they make
really
2
add
murder
up.
rolls instead of 1.
Yes, yes.
Amazing.
So these guys are a porcupine, right? They don't do a lot of damage on their own. You can pretty much ignore them, honestly, because they only have 1-inch range. They're not fighting reinforced. They're not getting a lot of attacks through. But it's the return damage. You have to be careful about what hits these guys. You want to shoot them. That's the best way to deal with them, because they're going to have a 5-up spell ignore, and they're going to have a 4-up rally. Shooting is the best way to go. But the thing is, you want to shoot everything in this army. So the fact that you really want to dedicate shooting to them means you're not putting it into other units. So you almost end up just fighting them because the shooting is just used better elsewhere.
Yeah, the other thing to note is sometimes what players will do, and I know a local player who does this, he runs this weird anvil formation where it's, or I want to say like a, I don't know how to put this, like a cup. He puts an anvil of blood warriors in a line to all just barely be coherent, and then he puts Skullreapers right behind them. So like just behind, so anything that's 1 inch is not going to hit the Skullreapers, and then Skullreapers have a 2-inch reach. So you hit the Blood Warriors, they bounce some mortal wounds back to you, and then the Skullreapers and Blood Warriors both fight and add a lot of value. And he runs this like in a formation sort of thing. It works, 5 Skullreapers. Wouldn't have thought that was a viable combo. I thought you would just reinforce Skullreapers, but it's like this weird thing that stands on objectives really well and also does a very respectable amount of damage.
Yep, high wound count. There's a lot of these like 10 model units with a 3-up save and like weak attacks. Saurus Warriors, Blood Warriors, Chaos Warriors. You could argue Vindictors are kind of in the same boat. Blood Warriors are the best one, right? Like they just do everything the best out of all of these units, especially because they can get a +1 save from Bronze Flesh that can't be unbound. A lot of these other armies are relying on things like Mystic Shield, which needs to be cast. There's downsides. Obviously, every unit has downsides. Their damage output in melee is not great. Like, you're not charging in and wiping things off objectives with these guys. They're only 1-inch range, so they can't fight reinforced. They are slow as the dickens. 5-inch move, and this is not the unit you want to be using your speed buffs on, so they're typically
almost be running this unit and standing on circles with it.
Running and murder lusting. That's what they do.
This is their anvil. This is to stop your units from blowing through their line to their slaughter priests and Bremgor ritualists.
Yeah. And they're good at what they do, so shouldn't be underestimated. They're not a high priority target. Like, you can keep them alive the whole game, never kill them, and you can still win, right? They're not a huge threat to you. But they will get in your way. They will stop you from trying to kill them, the Khorne player. And then if that's the anvil, well, this is the hammer, the Skullreapers. This is honestly, I really don't like the models. Let's just talk about that for a second here. These guys...
yeah, they're not the best.
Look at this dude in the back here with the scorpion fist and the tail. He's just the posing is so bad on these models. It's like peak Warhammer fantasy. These guys are meant to be on square bases and stacked up next to each other, and they just don't look great.
I will say though, like, they also have a lot of inordinate amount of like tiny spikes that don't make sense on the model. It just makes the model frustrating to paint and like sort of pick up or play with. The other thing is like, the paint job doesn't really do them any favors. Like you can see Blood Warriors were designed for Age of Sigmar and like the current paint scheme they have now, but that paint scheme does not transport well to these guys. These guys look great with something like flayed armor, so the paint job, here is like doesn't help because it's just a bunch of res and then you're showing a bunch of skin. If you helmet these guys using the Wrathmonger helmets, because that kit builds Wrathmongers too, this unit looks a lot better in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably like the best hammer unit in this book, but yeah, the models definitely look a little bit aged, but people do some interesting things when they base and like helmet these models, so it makes up for it.
The spikes make it look like a fuzzy JPEG,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It just makes it look like it's out of focus. Like, what do you want me to see? I'm just like constantly seeing little spiky things everywhere on the body, on the banner, on the sword. Like, come on.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk what makes them arguably the best unit in the book, though. For starters, they become battle line in Skullfiend Tribe, which might be the best subfaction. Their damage is good. It's like Bloodletter good. But instead of hit 6 mortals, instead of damage, it's in addition. So every hit 6 mortal is just bonus damage on top of that, which is one of the better combat bonuses in the game. They also have 2-inch range, so they're fighting when reinforced. They get +1 hit if they target a unit with 5 or more models, so they just don't need that many more command points. They make your army leaner and more efficient. Each attack bonus is another 5 max damage on hit 6 mortals. Yeah, they're worth buffing. They're worth reinforcing. They can run and charge if you have a Bloodstoker. They get a 4-up rally with a Bloodsecrator, so they're resilient against shooting. They make murder rolls when they die. They're also Bravery 9, which is weird. Like, you'd look at this unit and you wouldn't assume it's Bravery 9. You'd think maybe 7 or 8, but it's 9, so that is a thing. Like Blood Warriors, they're incredibly slow. 5-inch move. This is the unit that will be getting 3d6 charges because they want to activate the Skullfiend tribe ability to fight first if they make a charge roll of 8 or more. The downside, though, is they're a lot less durable than Blood Warriors. You know, instead of 20 wounds on a 3-up, you have 15 wounds on a 4-up, which is way worse. So these guys just get gunned down by high volume fire. Even if you give them +2 saves and against Ren 1 attacks, they'll still just die, right? Like, they're not that hard to kill. They're also on 40 mil bases, which makes it really awkward to fight if you go more than 10 models, like you go 15 in a unit. And there's very, very few ways to get +1 to wound rolls. In fact, if you go Skullfiend Tribe, I don't think you can get +1 to wound. So
No, there's no ways, I think, to get +1 wound here.
Yeah, so
unless a triumph, but yeah.
So they have some accuracy issues. You know, they're never going to wound on 2s in most builds. And that means they can swing low, which is, they're more likely to swing low. Anything can swing low, right?
I think the hit 6 mortal sort of makes up for that. I think it's like, because it's an addition, so it's meant to sort of offset the fact that they do not have a +1 to wound source.
Mm-hmm.
But this unit does like don't be like fooled by like the -1 rend 1 damage. Like, when this unit wants to kill something, it can really kill it. They're pretty dangerous.
It's like Chaos Chosen. They're weaker, right? They don't do as much damage because Chosen, I believe, are more damage per model. I think they're 6 per model. This unit's 4. So Chosen hit harder.
But this unit is also significantly cheaper and more likely, and faster in the way that the Allegiance ability sort of help them.
Yeah, it's just a different army, right? Like, if you brought a Khorne Chosen into this army, it wouldn't be nearly as good as the Skullreapers.
Yep.
But they are the equivalent of Chaos Chosen in the Khorne army.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk Mighty Skullcrushers, because you're going to see these guys. When the book first came out, people were really hot on them, but you don't see them that much anymore. You definitely don't see them spammed. You don't see these like pin and win lists that people thought they were going to see. What makes them good? Well, the main thing is that on their War Scroll, their save characteristic is a 2+. And they come in squads of 3 with 5 wounds apiece, so they are 15 wounds on a 2-up save. And they also have a 5-up ward against mortal wounds from spells in addition to their 5-up spell ignore. And they're fast. They're 8-inch move. And always +1 run and charge from their banner and musician. They're a fast anvil. And that's it. Their damage is not good. It says here good damage. That's not correct. These are not good damage. Mostly pretty bad damage, inaccurate. Best you can do is, 3s rend 2, which is less than 50-50 accuracy, and then only rend 2. Like, their damage is not what you bring them for. You bring them because you want an anvil that moves 8 inches that you can double to 16 with Killer Instinct. You want to pin things down with Murder Lust. You want to run in charge with Bloodstoker. That's what they do. They just get in your way.
Yeah, these guys are basically like, if my army was a lot of infantry, like Skullreapers and such, I might run Blood Warriors as the anvil. But if I was inclined towards more like Skull Cannons and Bloodthirster focus lists, you will see Skullcrushers in there because they have the movement to keep up with the Bloodthirster, so they can act as like a very mobile anvil. And these guys are tough to remove. You put a Mystic Shield or from an undivided unit or a Bronze Flesh on them, they're fairly difficult to shift, and so they will just tie you down for 2 to 3 turns while the Bloodthirsters run circles around you, or like the Skull Cannons keep shooting you. So yeah, that's their use. Their damage is it's fine, it's not great.
Yeah, they do charge mortals. They're not really a high source of damage.
Nope.
They're just trying to tie you down and waste your time.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
I fought 2 reinforced units of these very recently, and it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, it's hashtag waste your time. That's the unit.
Exactly, it wasted a hell of a lot of time. But they don't do a ton of damage at all. You just have to really decide, do you want the point that they're on and take them out, because it's going to take 2 rounds of combat, not just one, possibly even more.
Well, their damage is so poor that they might just fail to kill a 10 model screen or something, and then 3 models only count as 6 because that's, they're just tactically their only use is pinning things down. And as soon as people know how to avoid that or teleport away from it or just retreat and charge or something, like their use falls off a cliff. So Blood Warriors end up being more useful in general, but these guys are still the best at what they do in this army.
I found facing a reinforced units that the charge mortals became much more significant, just because they're averaging 5 every time. So and that's enough to just.
But this is one of those predictable units. You can account for this. You can waste its time with a screen. It's cool. You did charge mortals. Who cares? But since they don't have retreat and charge, they're only going to do that once.
Yeah, and they're so expensive that if all they're doing is killing screens, they're not worth using. So it's a weird unit in this army. Let's talk mortal heroes. First up is the Bloodsecrator. I think this guy, aside from the priest, is the most important hero in the book. He is like a Stormcast hero, 6 wounds, 3 up save. He has the 4 up rally, and he is a totem, so he's going to be issuing that to any Bloodbound unit only within 18 inches. That makes Bloodbound more resilient against shooting. Being able to revive reliably 3 Skullreapers per turn is pretty gross. And keep in mind that you can also rally before you use Bloodbind or Murderlust or any of these other Blood Tithe abilities, so you can revive a model and then Murderlust even closer. If you revive on the edge closer to an enemy unit and then Murderlust even closer, it's pretty cool stuff. His other ability is the Rage of Khorne. It's once per battle. Everything in the army on the table gets +1 attack in the combat phase. And he can be sitting in the back, issuing commands, and then when you need him to, he just turns this effect on, and bam, your whole army has +1 attack. This is really good for explosive turns, when you get the charge off with the Skullreapers on an 8-up, and you charge in with the Bloodthirster, and then you're fighting first with both of them, because let's say he has a Halo of Blood, and then you have another unit of Blood Warriors that are they all have +1 attack, you get this almost Big Wah style explosive turn. And that's what he does, those 2 things. Downsides, though, he's not a priest. And that's a big downside, because every hero in this army that's not a priest is almost a waste of points. This guy makes the cut, but just barely. He just barely makes the cut. And after using Rage of Khorne, if you don't have Bloodbound infantry to rally, if your Skullreapers aren't taking damage, or if they were wiped out, he does almost nothing. Right? It's not like he's generating free command points or anything. He's just a totem. He's just issuing them from further away. This army typically wants to be in combat, especially so that they can fight in the hero phase, right? And if you're in combat, you can't rally. Rally in general just has a lot of limits. It costs command points. Only 1 unit can get rally per turn. Can't be done in combat. It has a max revive of 10 wounds now, as per the FAQ. So rally is good, right? It's if he only had one of these effects, you wouldn't play this guy. It's the fact that he has this +1 attack and the 4-up rally that he sees play.
Anyone that has 10 Blood Warriors or a reinforced unit of Skullreapers will probably bring this unit for a damage boost and the 4-up rally, because otherwise those mortals don't have any a shooting army insurance.
Yeah, if a shooting or magic army can take this guy out, the rest of the army starts to just rot away because they won't have that rally anymore. Skarr Bloodwrath. He's a weird one to talk about because his damage almost doesn't matter. He has a cleaving attack where he gets 1 attack for every model within range. And yeah, you can get him up to Rend 3 and he can be a blender. Whatever. That's not why you're using him. The reason you're using him is because after he dies, at the end of movement, if he's destroyed, you roll 2 dice on an 8 or higher, he just gets to revive anywhere on the table more than 9 inches from enemies. And that's a really good, unpredictable effect, which is the only mobility this army has, and it requires killing him and then having him resurrect somewhere else, hoping you roll an 8+ on 2d6. And, before we had Primal Dice, how many times were you casting a spell on an 8+ with no bonuses? Not often enough that you'd rely on it, but the fact that you get to do this every movement phase, every time he's dead, and it's not just the first time he's dead, it's every time, as long as he's dead, he can just come back. So he's an interesting little tech piece, and you'll see him sometimes in Khorne lists. Just know that he can come back on objectives. He can come back and charge immediately. You know, if he has Beck in the Hunt, especially from a Fury Thirster, he's an annoying little guy. All right, let's talk priests. They're all similar enough that you can kind of, there's like 3 that you really care about. The one on the throne, not really a big deal. And they're all one chant priests, which means they chant 1 prayer per turn. All their stats are similar enough that it's not really worth going into that. They're all slow. They're all fragile. You know the drill. But what makes them all different? That's what we care about here. First up is the Blood Master. He's a demon, and his prayer is called Blood Mark. It gives a Blades of Khorne demons add 1 to wound rolls against an enemy unit. So you mark an enemy unit and +1 to wound against that. Now, Bloodthirster's already wound on 2s, so this is mainly for Flesh Hounds and Bloodletters and Skull Cannons. This does work on melee and shooting, so we'll work on the Skull Cannons. And the other thing this guy does is that when he fights, you can pull a Bloodletter unit into combat. So we talked about that with the Halo of Blood and how devastating that can be. But he's not really seeing that much play because people generally don't bring like big blocks of Bloodletters. They'll bring Skullreapers instead, and the Bloodmaster doesn't combo with that unit. What they will bring instead is the Slaughter Priest, because he unbinds. He's also a prayer, and he unbinds, which is great. His prayer signature is also good. Pick an enemy unit within 16. It takes D6 mortals. Awesome. Just, snipe out heroes.
Yeah. It also like helps finish off like low on health units and frees up your units for the movement, which is, I've seen Khorne players do that a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like use this in combination with something like a Brass Meteor. It can add up.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the last priest you care about is the Realm Gore Ritualist, a new model added in this edition. She has the Blood Hex, which is chance on a 4, range 16, and 1 enemy unit within range has -1 attacks with melee weapons. This seemed a lot better when the book first came out. But people ended up just using Slaughter Priests way more because they have an Unbind.
Yep.
But, man, is that a good prayer. -1 attack is a very strong effect.
Yeah, like, I feel like if Bloodbind wasn't a thing, I would be doing this with Killer Instinct a lot. But, situationally, this can be pretty good. If you're just slugging it out in the middle, -1 attack on, like a key unit that only has 2 attacks, you will absolutely nerf that unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing the Realm Gore Ritualist does is she has Desecrating Runes. You can pick an objective or terrain feature and Bloodbound Holy within 8 inches of it, get +1 hit for the rest of the battle. Now, she does have to be within 3 inches of that objective or terrain in order to activate it, but you can always just pick your own Skull Altar if you really want to, right? But +1 hit, that doesn't require command points, that stacks with all-out attack if you need to get through -1 hit effects. That's a good buff. You put her near an objective, like a central one you're trying to fight over, and you're just buffed for the rest of the game. So, it's fine. The problem is that you can have a Slaughter Priest for the same points, and he unbinds all the time, and he has Blood Boil, and that's just good. I think he also has a better save or more wounds or something. He's slightly more durable. So that's another thing. But yeah, all the priests are basically interchangeable. The one you'll see most often is the Slaughter Priest. Let's talk Be'lakor, because the rules are written in such a way that you can include Be'lakor in a Khorne army, even though he is a Slaves to Darkness wizard, and normally you're not allowed to bring wizards. It's worth just talking about Be'lakor because he is common enough in Khorne lists. What Be'lakor does is he has an ability called the Dark Master. It is once per battle at the start of the enemy hero phase. He can pick an enemy unit on the table until Be'lakor's hero phase. Every time that unit tries to move, shoot, fight, do anything on a 3+, it just can't do it for the whole phase. You roll it at the start of the phase, and that's incredibly strong, right? You can force the opponent to go first, disable their key unit, and then fish for a double turn. If you're going first and you're worried about a potential double turn, bottom of the round, you pop this on the enemy's most important unit, like Lord Croak or a big block of Dracolines or something. And there's just a good chance that it does nothing even through a double turn, because this lasts until the Be'lakor's next turn. Now, you can still use some abilities. It can't be used in reserve. There's limitations to this ability. The big problem with Be'lakor is that aside from this ability, he doesn't really do anything, right? He casts Mystic Shield, which is cool. He has 2 Unbinds, which is cool. But he's just so fragile that if he doesn't use Dark Master before he dies, you've wasted a lot of points. You know, he's only 14 wounds on a 4-up save, and he can't get bonuses to save, which is so silly. He is a 14-inch flying move monster, but this army has plenty of fast flying monsters, so that's not very useful. It's the Dark Master, right? Like that's why you're using him primarily.
Well, Dark Master, and it's the only source of like a save stack Mystic Shield.
Yeah, him or Thedra, right? There's very few sources. So,
yeah, and I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like having more unbinds, having 2 unbinds, and having Infigable Foe isn't a bad idea either. Like, it's Be'lakor is just such an excellent pointed utility unit. It's like the Celestin Prime for Chaos, if the Celestin Prime was actually good. But so you like, you will never like. Yes, there are only certain lists that will take him because not every list will find space for him. But the list, like, there is no Chaos player that has ever regretted taking this unit.
The one who rolls a 1 every time or a 2.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, the 3-up. Yeah, if you can't roll 3-ups, this is not the unit for you.
Yeah, if I was playing Khorne, I don't think I'd find room for him in my list. I think he's too expensive, and Khorne already has a lot of expensive stuff. They spend a lot of points on support and Bloodthirsters, and then they just don't have a lot of room left for other stuff. So what is he?
I think it can depend on the meta. If you were in a very like melee alpha heavy meta where you need double turn insurance, I think Be'lakor is the way to go. Like, you don't want to just get blown out by I don't know, like 3 pigs in your face or something. You just want to lock it down on a double turn. Yeah,
totally. I see the value in him. I just personal preference, I wouldn't use him, but you see him all the time. All right, miscellaneous units. Just a couple ones that are worth quickly talking about, not really going into great detail. First up are the Blood Reavers. If you see these guys on the table, ignore them. They do 0 damage. They just die to a stiff breeze. Like, just kill them for a battle tactic at some point. You know, like if you're playing Stormcast, there's 10 models. You can kill that with Tempesters and get a battle tactic. Just be careful you don't do that too early and feed the Khorne player Blood Tithe. Claws of Khorne, they're the same thing. They're a disposable screen. But what makes them different is that they can move after deployment. So they can, I believe they also have a 6-inch move. So they move 6, then they move 6, then they Killer Instinct, then they Murder Lust, then they run, and then on your turn they Murder Lust, and now you're tied down at combat. So that's a pretty annoying combo. Their damage is also poor. However, they also have the potential to be one of the best hammers in the book. If you give them every buff in the book, they can deal tremendous damage when reinforced, and they're very efficient. The problem is that they'll just die too quick before that matters, and Skullreapers are just better, so put your buffs on Skullreapers instead. The Bloodstoker. This hero gives a Bloodbound unit within 3 inches run and charge. The problem is that this ability is used at the start of the movement phase, and the unit has to be within 3 inches. And if you really care that much about speed on a unit, you're going to Murder Lust it, and you'll probably just Murder Lust out of range. Doesn't see a lot of play. Valkia the Bloody. She is a unique hero that deploys in reserve and drops into play. That's, she can do some mortal wounds when she comes into play, whatever. She does a bravery aura, doesn't matter. What matters is that she is a reserve unit that drops into play and scores you a battle tactic. And that's pretty much all people use her for. The Herald on Bloodthrone. He is a priest. Unlike the other priests, he's a lot more expensive. And what he does is his prayer revives either D6 Bloodletters or a Bloodcrusher. Bloodcrushers are not a unit worth talking about, so don't worry about that. But if you're running this like Bloodletter spam build that has a whole bunch of Bloodletter revival, this guy's one of the pieces. He's not worth talking about that much because he's 10 wounds, which means it doesn't benefit from Lookout Sir. So if you're ever facing him, you can just kill him anytime. Like, he's just always available to kill.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about the invocations. All 3 are good, right? This is a rare case in an army where all of their signature spells or prayers or whatever are useful. If they were cheaper, I would use all 3 in a list. I would, because they're all good. First up are the Hexscourger Skulls. It's a 2-part spell, chanting on a 3, range of 8. So you have to set up both pieces, and then when they move, they stay near each other. They're like Geminids, but instead of shutting off commands, they give wizards nearby -2 to cast. And also, and this is the spicy part, if the cast value is an unmodified 8, the spell fails, the caster forgets that spell, and every wizard within 8 inches of that wizard suffers D6 mortal wounds. Which is crazy. It's worth noting that invocations, when summoned from inside the Skull Altar, so if there's a hero garrisoning it, you double the range on them. So the threat range on this one in particular is 8-inch setup, 8-inch range, 8-inch move, and an 8-inch effect. So 24 inches. But if you double the range from 8 to 16, you end up with a threat range of 32 inches on this invocation, which is just massive. Like, that's huge. This one sucks, and the fact that you just can't stop it, like you can't dispel it instead, it's nasty. Even just the -2 cast is nasty enough. Not even this like cast value 8 thing, because that's reasonably easy to play around these days with primal dice in the game. The -2 cast is what makes this so good. Like,
well, I mean, the -2 cast makes it more likely that you'll use primal dice, and which means you might actually roll an unmodified 8. You know, the chances of that increase if your casting value is like low enough. Not only that, but like Khorne is like, if they don't take Velicor, they'll pop Pouch of Null Dust, and that comboed with this, it's just like just like just complete anti-wizard tech.
oh yeah, -2 cast, and then unbinding from Flesh Hounds who have primal dice to unbind. It's great.
Yeah. It's pretty gross.
Yeah. Bleeding Icon, it's horror ghast, but it can't be dispelled. Enemy units can't receive Inspiring Presence, and they lose more models when they do fail a battle shock. D3 additional models flee, but if you roll a dice in on a 6, then D6 flee, and this banishes itself. So it has a chance to just get rid of itself, which sucks. But most of the time when you do force enemies to battle shock, it's on your own turn. In which case, it's done what it needs to do. Enemies typically don't take battle shock on their own turn, so if it dispels itself, it's not the end of the world. Same threat range, 8-inch range, 8-inch move, 8-inch effect, which means 24 inches or 32 from the Skull Altar. Now the Wrath Axe, this one, the other two are just support, the anti-spell, anti-horde. This one just does damage every turn. It's also really good at it. So it sets up within 8 inches, then it moves 8 inches, and then you pick a unit within 1 inch or any unit you passed over, and on a 2 up, they take D3 mortal wounds. So it's like a pendulum that doesn't have to move like the pendulum. Right, which is
also remove in your turn because it's an invocation.
Yes, and it can't be dispelled, which means it's just going to keep chopping things until it just wears off. Like, it's really good, surprisingly good. Like, people really underestimate this one. The threat range on this guy is 8-inch range, 8-inch move, 1-inch effect, so 17 inches, or 25 inches from a Skull Altar. So if you just want to avoid taking any damage, you can be 25 inches away from all priests. Well, 17 away from all priests, and then an extra 8 inches away from the altar. Subfactions, real quick here. Reapers of Vengeance. We talked about this when we talked about Skull Cannons. They get +1 hit when they're targeting heroes, and when you slay a hero, you gain an extra tithe, so 2 tithe total. Now, this was really good with Skull Cannons, but since the lookouts are changed, pretty much nobody's playing this anymore.
Yes, I mean, I know some people might still try this, I think, particularly because like it's still sort of playable with Soul Blight and Gits being at the top tables alongside like Khorne, Khorne, all 3 of these factions are very hero heavy, so there is some play for this, but it is definitely not as good as it used to be.
Yeah, the +1 hit, Bloodletters don't get more mortal wounds from it or anything, and you can always just all-out attack. So it really comes into play when you're fighting with multiple units that aren't Bloodthirsters because they already hit on 2s. It's niche. Like, the main niche was Skull Cannons, so we'll see if that changes. The Bloodlords is the other demon-based faction that people are playing, and what this does, instead of hit 6 mortals, you get hit 5 mortals, so doubling the amount of mortal wounds that Bloodletters do. And this is any unit with the Bloodletter keyword, not just the host, not just the infantry. This is the Skull Cannons. Actually, no, I don't think they actually have. Skull Cannons don't have Bloodletter keyword, which is stupid. But Bloodcrushers do, and the Herald on the Throne does as well. Now, it is important to note that this is only if you charge that turn. So if you Murderlust into range, you don't get it, unfortunately. But it does work on summoned units. So if you summon 20 Bloodletters and then 3d6 charge them with Beck in the Hunt, they will have hit 5 mortals that turn. So you might see this sometimes if they're doing a Bloodletter spam list with the Herald on Throne using the command trait to revive. Not a super popular tactic right now, but it could come up again if point shifts happen. The most popular competitive option is definitely the Skullfiend tribe. This gives Bloodbound units strike first if their charge rolls an 8 or more, which is usually the case when you're charging with a Fury Thirster who's going to give you 3d6 charges. It also makes Skullreapers battle line, and they're one of the key units in this army. So natural combo. It's not particularly flashy or big. And there's going to be a lot of games where it just doesn't activate, either because you don't roll an 8-up charge or you don't get to charge with a Bloodbound unit. They get charged first and then they're just slogging in combat the whole time. But it's good enough that, it's better than any of the other options. The Battle Line Skullreaper thing is pretty nice. All right, so let's talk Khorne Strengths. We've been talking a lot about this army, and it'll be good to kind of get this all in a single place. So first up, Blood Tithe rewards are huge in this game. They're game-changing effects. They have a very high skill cap. They combo into each other. They create lines that will take a stalemate into a winning position, or take you from a comeback and put you back into a neutral position. Like, Blood Tithe is incredibly powerful, and when it's managed properly and you get fed the right amount, you can just run away with the game. Their prayers in particular combo well with all the Blood Tithe abilities, and all of them can be rerolled near a Skull Altar, and they can't be stopped like a spell. There's almost no armies that can interact with the Invocations, which are all good. The buffs this army has are insane, right? Especially to speed, between Killer Instinct to move in the hero phase, Beckon the Hunt to get a 3d6 charge, Murderlust to move d6 in the hero phase. They give huge max threat ranges. Like, the potential movement in this army is tremendous. Their anti-magic is very good, and that's a very useful thing to have in the current season of the game, and also after they've released armies like Seraphon and things like that use spells to deal damage. An army-wide 5-up spell ignore that also generates Tithe is really, really good. Like, people will usually just not cast spells at you in the first turn because they're worried that if you get a couple lucky rolls, you just snowball the game away. Hexgorger Skulls play into that naturally. Wizard heavy armies with -2 to cast, like, it just messes up our magic armies. They've got battle line units that have unbind, like the Flesh Hounds. Priests that you're going to bring anyway, they can unbind. Demon units have a 5-up ward, and you can unbind spells without a dice roll for 2 Tithe. Like, Voidstorm Scroll without having any unit on the table every turn that you want it. It's just really, really good. Sometimes you just stop a Mystic Shield. And that's enough for 2 Tithe. That is a huge win for you. They're one of the few armies that can summon in this game, and that's a very useful thing, especially because their summoning is based on units dying, and it doesn't matter which units are dying. So even as your army is being destroyed, you're losing your screens, you're losing support heroes, you can reload. You can get a big reload with 20 Bloodletters and charge them in immediately that same turn, pretty reliably. They have some good defensive tools for dealing with ranged and magic and things. They get a 4-up rally on Bloodbound and a 5-up ward on Demons. That makes them pretty decent into shooting, but they're definitely still not the best army to deal with shooting. Bloodbind in particular needs to be pointed out again on its own. It's just such an incredibly powerful ability to pull units within 3 inches in the hero phase and then use Frenzy to fight in the hero phase. That is a game-winning combo. It can't be stressed enough how strong that is. Murderlust also allows you to move within 3 inches of an enemy. So if you don't want to get hit by Unleash Hell, you just move within 3 inches. You don't get charge bonuses, but they don't get to Unleash Hell, which is a good trade-off. If you're within 3 inches, they also can't redeploy. You can lock an enemy down with Murderlust, move all your other units around that unit, and then retreat out of combat even, which is really cool. And if you tie units down in their turn, like if they tie down a bunch of cavalry or shooting, like, you might just be forcing them to retreat, which is a huge tactical victory. Enemies can really struggle to charge into a Bloodthirster. A Fury Thirster has, -1 hit. He can stomp. He might have Halo of Blood. So it's enough damage sometimes that you're like, maybe I won't charge in this, weaker hammer unit. Like, Grand Hammer Annihilators really struggle to deal with Bloodthirsters. If you don't charge properly on the right angle and get the right pile in, they can really be hurt by this Bloodthirster. All right, well then, how do we counter Khorne? I've got this Penny Arcade comic here that I think is relevant. It's about Team Fortress 2, where the medic is being healed by the heavy, and the character is just pleading to you, don't shoot the heavy, shoot the medic. This motherfucker right here, shoot him first. That's how you got to beat Khorne, man. You gotta kill the heroes. If you can't get to the heroes, Khorne is going to be at its full potential all game long, and that is going to make the game a lot harder for you.
Yeah, I want to add to this quickly. It's going to sound really weird. You can't kill this army too fast. That actually helps them. You don't want to just go out like an alpha strike and kill 4 units in one go, because their swing back is going to be really hard if you do that.
Yeah, if you kill all the support heroes, that might be a worthwhile thing, but if you're killing a
Yeah, if you're
priest
killing,
and
like-
3 screens, that's not worth
Yeah,
it.
if you're killing like 2 untamed beasts and a flesh hound, don't do that. Like leave them on one model alive if you can.
Ideally, yeah. Sometimes they'll just choose not to use Inspiring Presence so that they can get the Tithe instead. So army weaknesses and limitations. Once the buffs are gone, Khorne really starts to feel like a slow, pathetic army. Most of the army is very slow, 5 to 8 inch move. Without these speed bonuses, they are not going anywhere. They're not really doing much of anything. And it is a melee-focused army, despite having decent shooting options. They don't really see a lot of play because they're not very efficient. And the army is very elite, so it needs to really squeeze where it can. So it ends up being a lot of slow infantry. And only one unit can get Killer Instinct. Only one unit can get Beck in the Hunt. And everything else in the army is 5 to 8 inch move. And usually you want to combo those abilities together, right? It's not like sometimes you'll give one unit a double move and then 3d6 charge a different unit. But it's usually the case that you're giving them on the same unit. And then the rest of your army is just running forwards and not doing anything else. In addition to that, a lot of the army doesn't do good damage, right? Like we're talking 20 max damage is pretty common per War Scroll. If you reinforce, they go up to 40 max damage. There's not really ways to boost their accuracy that high. They're going to be on 2s and 3s for the most part, sometimes 2s and 4s in the case of Blood Warriors. So their damage potential is not great. They need these buffs. They need the bonuses to rend. They need the bonuses to attacks that this army can get. And if they don't have them, their units are not very good. In particular, this army can actually really struggle with save stacking, right? There's very limited mortal wound output here. The main sources are Skarbrand, who can only be in one place at one time, Skullreapers, who have to roll hit rolls of 6, and prayers. But the prayers are quite limited in how much damage they can do. There's not a lot of Rend 2 attackers, right? Skullreapers are only Rend 1. Bloodthirsters aren't very high volume. So you need things like Unholy Flames to push that Rend higher. Otherwise, you're just not getting through units like double reinforced Tempesters with Mystic Shield and a Castellan Lantern and things like that. You're just not going to get through it unless you have Unholy Flames and a Skarbrand, typically. That's what you need to get through armor. If you have any -1 attack or -1 wound effects, Khorne really starts to fall apart. Like, if they go from like below average to good by getting a +1 attack effect, then they go from below average to like trash tier when they get a -1 attack effect. If you're playing into things like Karazai or Slanesh, who's debuffing your attack characteristic, or if your 3-up units are now wounding on 4s or your 4-up units are wounding on 5s, you really, really suffer. Like when you hit with this army, you need to make sure it's going to do what you need it to do, right? If low rolls really hurt this army, and anything that can make those low rolls more common is really bad for them. They can also struggle to deal with mass wound count armies. So things like Sons of Behemoth, Soulblight Gravelords, these armies that just have so many wounds on the table, Khorne can't kill them fast enough usually. Like one of the reasons Khorne is not doing one of the things that's holding it back right now is the fact that Soulblight Gravelords is Ascendant as the premier army in the game, and they just have so many bodies and wounds on the table, and then they revive them every single turn, and Khorne just can't keep up. Like, yeah, you're going to get a ton of Blood Tithe killing this stuff over and over and over, but you're not going to get on the objectives, and you just can't chop them down fast enough. Khorne is not a particularly durable army, right? If you can get around the strike first gimmick by having the right charge into the right pile-in, they're actually a pretty vulnerable army in melee in particular. Blood Warriors are the one exception to this, but everything else kind of just dies as soon as it gets hit in melee. So if you're charging into it with, 3 Dracolines even, can usually take a huge chunk out of this army. The main hammer units are only a 4-up save. The anvil units in this army don't deal significant damage, so they can mostly be ignored. There's very few ways for this army to stop enemy shooting, right? They just lose models every single turn that an enemy shooting unit is alive. They don't have much that can reach across the table and hit them. They don't have teleports or reserves that can get around the army, so they have to go through all the screens first, and that just buys more time for the shooting. Poor mobility, right? Their reserve option is Valkia, and she's not a hammer. She's just a battle tactic on a stick. There's no retreat and charge. There's very limited flying. Like most of the hammer units don't fly. And once you get stuck in bad combats with this army, it just gets really bad. Because like I said, they're quite vulnerable in melee. The ranged options that this army does have are pretty lackluster, so people often skip them. But if you do skip them, then you have nothing to deal with screens. And for a melee army to have no way to deal with screens is tactically not the best idea. So you have to play in a very particular way where you send wave after wave of guys, and hopefully you get the right charges. And that play style can be disrupted. It's not a foolproof plan by any means. This army does have summoning, which is great, but the summoning requires spending Tithe, which is probably necessary for you to win by moving and dealing damage, right? The way Khorne will usually win games is by murder lusting and using frenzy at the right times and creating scenarios where those can be really high impact abilities. And if you're spending all your Tithe on summoning, and your opponent is starving you of Tithe on purpose, like they're playing very carefully and not just killing everything randomly and not giving up any Tithe. Like if you're playing against Gargants, for example, you're going to get maybe 1 Tithe per turn from the Gargant player. Spending all that on summoning, that's pretty rough because you really want that extra damage output. The prayers are really good, and most of them are 3-up and 4-up with a reroll near the altar, but that's not totally reliable. And as Stormcast players, I'm sure we can attest to this. Anytime you have a 3+ reroll on a Knight Relictor, that fails every time you absolutely need it to happen, right? Like the key moment when you need it, like you declare a battle tactic with translocation in mind, that's the turn you're not going to get that translocation, even with a reroll. So not totally reliable. Their grand strategies are also very bad. I really want to bring attention to how bad Khorne grand strategies are. None of them are good, and that can kind of further limit their tactical advantage when they're not just scoring free victory points like if they were Tzeentch or Soulblight or something like that. All the army battle tactics also require melee combat, and the seasonal tactics this time require specific positioning, especially around the edges of the table. And these two things don't mix, right? When you have battle tactics that tell you to put your key units on the outside of the table, out of the middle of the board, because you're not that fast, like you want to be in the middle of the board, then you have battle tactics that are like kill stuff. You're kind of being told two different things, right? So Khorne can really just get pulled in different directions, and tactically it's a little bit limited in that way. So let's talk tips and tricks against Khorne, right? With all those limitations in mind, just random notes in whatever order we put them in here. I'll start off. You got to know which priests have Killer Instinct and Bloodbind, because Age of Sigmar is a game won through movement. Combat and damage, all that stuff only exists so that you can move across the board and take up space. And these two abilities, Killer Instinct and Bloodbind, they're so crucial for this army. And if you know which priest has them, you know how far to stay away from them, right? In particular, the combo of Killer Instinct and Bloodbind is really, really powerful, because Bloodbind can pull units into combat and then they fight in the hero phase. So Bloodbind moves unit 8 inches, which means you can't be pulled into combat if you are 11 inches away from all the priests. Now, Bloodbind has a 16-inch range, which means if you're more than 16 inches from the priest with Bloodbind, you just can't be affected by it at all. However, it gets a little more complicated, because Killer Instinct can allow a priest to move in range to chant the Bloodbind. So, for example, and this is a combo you'll see all the time, if there's a Firebrand Bloodthirster, right, so he becomes a priest, he gets taught Bloodbind, and another priest moves him with Killer Instinct. So the Bloodthirster moves 12 inches, then he has a 16-inch Bloodbind. That means you need to be more than 28 inches away from that Firebrand in order to avoid that combo. And turn 1, that's pretty easy to do, but the key is being away from it turn 2 and 3 when they'll actually have the Tithe needed in order to fight you in the hero phase. On the topic of Tithe, you got to keep in mind how much Tithe your opponent has. Blood Sacrifice can push them into specific thresholds, so for example, if they start their turn with 3 Blood Tithe, you know that they're going to use Blood Sacrifice, get a 4th one, and then fight you immediately using all that Tithe. So try not to end a turn within 3 inches of them if they have 3 or more Tithe, because they can sacrifice then fight you immediately. Now it is worth noting they can't murder lust. They can't murder lust and fight you in the same hero phase. They can only do one or the other. So you don't have to deal with both. The scarier one is definitely the fighting, right? On their turn, they want to fight as much as possible, do as much damage as possible, get more Tithe. Now, they also do have a chance to fight you before you have a chance to retreat. So if you're trying to do bait and trap, which requires retreating with 2 units and charging with 2 other units, you could run into a situation where they declare a fight in the hero phase, kill a unit that's about to retreat, and ruin your battle tactic. Now, best way to avoid that, if you do start a hero phase within 3 inches, use a hero phase teleport. Things like the Seraphon teleport with the heroic action or Stormcast translocation. or other armies that have teleport abilities, getting out of that combat is a very useful thing to do because you know they're going to want to fight you. Let's talk Murderlust and how to avoid it, right? Like obviously, if you are Murderlust can only move 6 inches max, right? And you want to avoid being pulled within 3 inches. So if you finish your turn more than 9 inches away from Khorne, Murderlust alone will not push them into combat. If they want to do that, that means they'll have to dedicate a Killer Instinct, and maybe that's not the unit they want to Killer Instinct, right? Like maybe it's 10 Blood Reavers that are just within range to Killer Instinct and then Murderlust to tie you down. But that's not a very useful unit to tie you down. They'll probably just die in the combat phase immediately, right? So what are your guys' best tips for dealing with Murderlust? Or do you have any particular examples that we want to go over?
Watch out for, like, account for what happens if they... Well, so the two things you need to watch about Murderlust is they can use Murderlust to just get extra movement to get a key charge off. But then there's stuff they do to make sure your hammer units don't go anywhere else. So, like, let's say they have, like, a support hero and, like, a unit in front. And they're both somewhat within, like, 8 or, like, 6 inches of you or something. If, let's say you kill the first thing but you can't get to the support hero. Let's say you get a double. They'll use Murderlust to, like, tie whatever unit you use to kill their screen up because they don't want you, like, going somewhere they don't want you to be. And you have to, like, account for that possibility. And unfortunately, there's sometimes not a lot you can do. But just know that, like, it is something that they can use on your turn. So if you get a double, you have to account for what happens if they're Murderlusting twice.
Yeah, it's pretty scary when you think about the threat ranges. Let's say you take the top of turn 1, or they force you to go first. They can Murderlust in your turn, or I guess you won't have Tithe. But let's say round 2, you're going at the top of the round. They can Murderlust in your hero phase, and then Killer Instinct and Murderlust in their hero phase at the bottom of the round. And then let's say they win a double, they can Murderlust and hero and Killer Instinct again in the top of round 3. So that amount of movement is tremendous, but all of it can only be done if they're not in combat, right? If you're in combat, you can't make a move with Murderlust, I believe. You have to be more than 3 inches away from enemies. So one thing you can do against Khorne to stop them from doing all this movement shenanigan is just pile into them, right? Charge into them with something that they can't kill, find something that doesn't have a lot of rend or mortal wounds, and then charge something in with all-out defense and Mystic Shield. It's really important that you are prepared to deal with summons as you trade your units down. Even if you kill their whole army, they can still summon from the altar. So be prepared to deal with 20 Bloodletters charging in, especially if they have Beck in the Hunt to get a 3-6 charge, or even Flesh Hounds, right, with +2 to steal objectives. These kind of sneaky plays are how Khorne goes from like a mid-tier army to a high-tier army. Is that there's a lot of unexpected things that people get caught off guard by. So
the biggest thing you guys need to think about when you guys play Khorne is a good Khorne player does not play Khorne, I guess, I don't know how else to say this, but like in a fluffy way. Like, they're not just going to run up to you in the middle of the board and fight you in the middle. Because they know you're not going to be dumb enough to just go run up to them in the middle. So every time you play Khorne, think about they're like a scalpel more than just like a hammer. Every time I've seen really good Khorne players play, and I'm fortunate enough to have good Khorne players in my meta, is they'll trade with you, but very few, and they try to trade in their favor. So what I mean by this is they kind of want to go toe-to-toe with you and go like 5-5, 5-5, or 4-4, 4-4. And then they'll try to either win that double to just overwhelm you with all their Bloodthirster and their Murderlust and everything. But they really just want to pick your strong pieces as much as they can, like one at a time, or just kind of swarm one area of the board and then move on. So the best way to kind of counter that is really recognize what units they want to give away and what units they're trying to save. You'll know this usually right away. Like 80, 100 point units of Flesh Hounds or Claws. They're obviously just trying to throw those things on objectives and forcing you to kill them and give them Blood Tithe. Those blobs of warriors or their hammers, what they want to keep alive. So you kind of want to, whenever you want to play Khorne, you kind of just want to piece the outsides and then kind of work your way in. The other reason for this is because usually the heroes are going to be super protected within those big blobs, or just bodyguarded essentially by Bloodthirsters or Skarbrand or whatever. So it's really just you have to be very focused on finding opportunities to take chunks out of their army on the sides, because you really don't know. If you let them scalp you, they will run away with it really fast. And if they double you, it's probably game over. Is what I've noticed, because they can just move so fast.
The 5-up spell ignore also generates blood tithe. So be careful not to feed Khorne too much tithe early on in the game, especially rounds 1 and 2. The longer they don't get to that 4 tithe threshold, like if you can give them 0 tithe in round 1 and 0 tithe in round 2, that's a really good, that's a good scenario to be in terms of tithe allocation, because then they won't have enough to use the hero phase fight. Now, that's not always doable. Like 1 round you can go without killing too much, but after that round, you're probably just going to assume that they're going to have all the tithe they need. But don't feed it to them unnecessarily. And casting spells at them is the main way they're going to generate a ton of tithe. I know it's tempting to, try to get through that 5-up spell ignore with like an Everblaze Comet or something, or a Blizzard, but early on, not really worth it. Khorne is very much a snowball army. You don't want them getting too far ahead too early. On that same kind of topic, when it comes to Bloodbound units, don't let them benefit from a 4-up rally. This is an incredibly powerful ability, and think of it like half the damage you do to this unit until you wipe it out, half the damage you do is going to be ignored, right? Don't put yourself in a position where you're just wasting a lot of damage on these units for no reason. Be ready to commit damage in order to fully wipe them out. Even, like, because double turns happen, and because rally can be used at the top of a turn, what players can do is just retreat and then start rallying back every turn. And if they get a double with that strategy, their unit is pretty much back to full health. Like it's really just a waste of your time in order to put damage into Bloodbound units, unless you're going to wipe them out fully. So when you charge into the Skullreapers, or when you're ready to countercharge them because they've already charged into you, just be ready to fully wipe them out. Don't leave a single model left alive. Don't shoot them off, top of round 1. Don't waste a Thunderbolt volley into them. They're just going to rally it back. If you can, kill the Bloodsecrator, tie them down in combat, or just ignore them until you can do one of those things. Blood Warriors are annoying. They're another one of these units that can get the 4-up rally. They're, like we said, they're a unit you want to shoot because they have so much reflective damage in melee. But your shooting is honestly better spent elsewhere. What you want to do with Blood Warriors, for the most part, is ignore them. They're not a huge threat. They're just bodies, but they're not high damage bodies. Damage into them just feels like a waste of time. Abilities that deal mortal wounds, Ren 2 shooting, high volume shooting that can get through when they don't have bronze flesh. All of these are good ways to deal with Blood Warriors, but they're not a high priority target.
Be careful in this matchup with Magical Domination as your battle tactic. If you're not watching their Blood Tithe, all they have to do is really pop 2 to take away their battle tactic. So whenever I play Khorne, I don't even put Magical Domination as a tactic in my head. I just take that away. I just assume I don't have it in the game.
Well, unless you're trying to score round 1 before they have the tithe needed to get rid of it.
Yes, that is true. That's very true. Bear in mind, something I've been noticing too when I've been watching other people play Khorne is, remember that demons and mortals, there's a huge distinction that the demons are the ones that get the wards. So be very conscious about what you're shooting and what you're playing and what you're fighting up against, because that can drastically change how you play. So don't be afraid to shoot the mortals, because they're not going to get wards. It's the demons that are going to get the wards majority of the time.
And the last thing I want to point out here is Khorne really wants to control the flow of combat. He is the god of warfare. He wants to dictate the charges. He wants to dictate forcing your opponents to retreat with impeccably timed murder lusts. He wants to pull units in and use hero face fighting. He wants to be in control of the combat. And you can take all that away if you just charge them first. If you go very... if you can take out screens and then get to the important units and be very aggressive, this is not a durable army. And if you can deal critical damage to support pieces in particular, this army starts to really fall apart. Here is a list of common threat ranges you'll find from units. This lists the absolute maximum these units can move, just to illustrate a point of how far these units can go in one turn. So Blood Reavers and Claws of Khorne, they can move 6 inches, they can Killer Instinct another 6 inches, they can Murder Lust D6, which you can assume is a 6, right? and then they can charge a max of 2d6 or 12. Or they can get a 3d6 charge with the Bloodthirster, and then they get a 36-inch maximum threat range. It's also worth noting the Claws of Khorne can add 6 inches onto this because they get a pre-game move. Whereas Skullreapers and Blood Warriors, they cap out at 28 inch with 2d6 or 34 inch on 3d6. Still incredibly high threat range. When you're playing against it, you assume they're going to murder less 6, but the Khorne player obviously is assuming they're going to murder less a 1. Once you get up to some of the faster units like Skullcrushers, you can see they have a 40-inch threat range. Bloodthirsters, of course, can't get the 3d6 charge. They cap out at max 2d6, but because they have a 12-inch move, they end up going 42 inches, and they fly, which is an incredible ability. Skarbrand, in particular, he always has a 3d6 charge just on his War Scroll, but he can move, he can Killer Instinct, he can Murder Lust. He caps out at 40 inches. So if you're 40.1 inches, Skarbrand is doing 0 damage to you. And it's really important to note with Skarbrand, he does not fly. So he is charging screens, he's not jumping over them. If they don't have any range damage, then your screens just absorb all the damage. So let's talk about some good Stormcast units that you can include in your army when you are facing Khorne. First up, Vanquishers and Liberators. They're cheap, they're reliable screens, 10 wounds wide enough on 5 model wide. They can be dropped in the way to block movement. They die, then you revive them with Call for Aid to block another turn of movement. If you're playing a list without screens in Stormcast, this is a good reason to use screens, right? Armies like Khorne, Ironjaws, Slaves to Darkness, these aggressive melee armies. If you don't have these cheap units, you're just going to get run over and all your expensive stuff is going to be killed. You don't stop Khorne from charging, but you can choose what they charge. So do you want them to charge a 100-point Vanquisher unit, or do you want them to charge a 600-point reinforced Stormdrake unit? That's your choice. And the better choice is always for them to charge the unit of Liberators. So use screens. They are an awesome tactical piece.
Mm-hmm.
Liberators, Vanquishers. I really do like Liberators as screens. That 3+ save, sometimes you just get lucky. And that's enough to maybe you get to hold back a Murder Lust for a turn, and that's huge.
The complete opposite of a screen is Karazai. I think Karazai is actually really good into Khorne in particular. He has -1 attack, which is brutal against this army, and the high save stacking you can do on him with the Lord Castellant, that's not a spell, that's just an ability, so he always gets +1 save there. He's really hard to kill for Khorne. Khorne doesn't have super high rend or super high mortal wounds, aside from Skarbrand, right? So Karazai is really good as long as you don't let him get attacked by Skarbrand. Though odds are, if you can connect with Karazai into Skarbrand and fight first, you will probably kill Skarbrand before he has a chance to hit you back. Just make sure he dies, and the rest of the game should be a breeze. He's also really good for battle tactics. You can score Draconith Destruction against so many units in this army, which requires killing a unit with 10 or more models, and he can also score a Matter of Honor against Bloodthirsters, which is awesome. Like, Karazai into Khorne is a great matchup. His 14-inch flying move allows him to just sit back even further and then take the fights he wants when he wants to take them. There's not really much in the Khorne army that can tar pit him. Maybe Blood Warriors might be an issue. You don't want to be fighting Blood Warriors because they do a lot of reflective mortal wounds, but everything else in this army just really struggles to tar pit Karazai. He will just cut them all down. He can also use Finest Hour. If you're stuck in combat and you expect your opponent to use Frenzy in order to fight in the hero phase, well, heroic actions happen first, so you'll have Finest Hour against that hero phase fight. So you're on a 2-up save in the hero phase, and they're spending 4 Tithe to do not much because they'll be -1 attack.
One thing I did notice, if you guys have a lot of Khorne in your meta, strongly start considering double reinforced Praetors. And the only reason I say this is because of the murder rolls. So in my games versus Khorne, like, Karazai could pick, like, it doesn't matter that the Blood Warriors and stuff have 3+ saves. Like, you have -3 on your Jaws, and then you have -2 on the other weapons, and then tail and all that. So they're kind of, every time I play a Khorne player with the blobs of Blood Warriors, their whole goal is they want to swarm you, get as many of them within 3 inches, and then just try to kill you with murder rolls because they bypass your +2, +3 save with Castle and Misc Shield and all that. So they're really relying on those 5+ murder rolls. So having Praetors that straight up just say find a 5+ that doesn't ignores it really can break a back. of a Khorne player. Guarded, I know we talk about Guardus too a lot. The only reason I don't like Guardus compared to Praetors in a Khorne situation is because Guardus, you're still taking wounds on Karazai. For every 5+ you don't make. So I really do like Reinforced Brazier, and they're cheaper now. So really do think about the Praetors.
It is also definitely worth pointing out with Karazai that the Khorne artifact that disables wards also disables Praetors. People may not be aware, but Praetors do count as a ward. Even the 3-up pass, that counts as a ward ability. So if they get that Khorne model with the artifact within 3 inches of Karazai, he will not be able to use the Praetor's bonding ability.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that. Also, if you were running any big expensive price tags like Karazai, be aware if they have a call where that call is, because if the call gets a wound through on a 5+, they're gonna pick up your Karazai or whatever expensive unit you have.
Oh, you mean Korgus Cool, the special character with an instant kill ability? Yeah.
Yeah. So just be wary. I mean, a good Khorne player is gonna usually keep him like within a block of warriors and stuff, like just to make sure he can't get like shot out. The best way I've seen it is either try to bait or just buff yourself up, or what I did, and I just wish I could actually roll better, was buff yourself up so hard to the point where you get an opportunity to come in, but then you get a strike back and kill the call. So, but yeah.
I think a good Khorne player just won't be using Korgus Cool.
But he's so cheap now that like he's easy to slot in. That's the thing I've noticed. Like he's so cheap that like he's really easy slotting for one of the other heroes. So just be mindful.
His 8-inch pylon is really cool. I like that ability.
Yeah, he moves a lot fast, especially with Murph Lust. You're like, oh, okay, he's across the board now.
He's in melee. Okay.
We often talk about Annihilator lists and how they can deploy 7 inches away, and this is really good because one of the key things Annihilators like doing is combining their damage with some shooting damage, support from shooting units. And dropping 7 inches away means, you can disable Locus of Fury so they don't get that 5-up ward up. If you try to shoot demons through a 5-up ward, it gets, really, really difficult because they essentially have 50% more effective health. So always, like, even if you can drop, not Annihilators but Vanquishers and then shoot them, it's preferable. The only problem is they are only 9 wounds on a 3-up save, so you need to play around things like Halo of Blood and Stomp, which, can be easy to do. Khorne likes to, like, group up their units a lot because they like supporting whatever other, like, anvil units they have with that, which lets you charge in such a way where you can avoid a 3-inch effect from the any monstrous actions in the Halo of Blood, and then pile in and hit a Bloodthirster behind some Blood Warriors with a 2-inch reach. It requires a bit of finesse to do, but it is doable. And they have to sort of deal with this unit before they can charge. So, like, often, and this is not a unit, that they can tie up with Murderlust because it's in reserve. So they have to, like, always keep accounting for it. So Annihilators are actually a pretty good unit against Khorne.
Mm-hmm. Add that little drawing that I've put in Discord that shows how to pile in this exact scenario, right? You charge a flank outside of 3 inches of the Bloodthirster, then you pile in within that 3-inch range so you can hit them. I'll have to find that somewhere on our Discord server and add it. It may be tempting to charge a Bloodthirster with Annihilator so that you can deal charge mortal wounds. That's a trap. Don't do it, right? Because if you charge a Bloodthirster to deal mortal wounds, that means he's going to be in range to stomp you and fight first with Halo of Blood. You absolutely want to avoid these things. So you want to charge mortal wound into something else and then pile in towards the Bloodthirster in order to fight him. The Ren 2 attacks on these guys with 3 damage apiece, those will cut down the Bloodthirster. You don't need the charge mortal wounds. If you're really worried, like he's got a Finest Hour or Bronze Flesh or something, add shooting, right? Don't rely on these charge mortal wounds. They're not going to be enough to kill it by itself. Have you tried Questers yet? Have you gotten any games in with them?
I've got 1 game with them. I like them. I don't know if I'd bring 2 of them, but I think 1 is pretty good.
Yeah, 1 feels good. 2 if you have a skew list of some kind,
Yeah, it's just they are good, but like ultimately what I was finding was like they're only still surviving 1 turn. So they're good for like a turn to take objectives, but on a swing back they're not living against most things. And like against Soulblight they help a bit, but ultimately Soulbite engages you whether you want to or not, and then just hopes that you'll do enough damage to it so they can bounce mortal wounds back on you, and that's the problem with that Quester's Soulsworn.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we just spam them alongside Gardas or something. I don't know.
I've tried that. I'm not a fan of it, but anyway, yeah, Quester's against Khorne. What do you think?
Yeah, no, if they can drop 7 away, they're good. I mean, you're not going to have really problems taking objectives against Khorne. They're not, I would say, a model-heavy army. They're about as elite as we are, and you're typically either killing things and finishing them off to where you'll be able to take objectives. But it's like sort of a unit where like you sort of want to engage Khorne, but you don't because then you end up giving them Blood Tithe. And if you don't want to do that, then Questers are like perfectly acceptable to just like hold their attention while you're the one who scores points because they don't have a lot in their armies usually to be able to like outscore like 18, counting as 18 on a key objective or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have to commit a lot of damage to get this unit down. Like one Bloodthirster counts as 5 models, right? They can't contest an objective against this until they reduce the Questers down to 1 model. Because as long as 2 Questers are alive, they count as 6, which beats that 1 Bloodthirster. So just in terms of resource allocation, they have to overcommit to deal with the Questers in this matchup. And what really makes them special in this matchup is it's one of the few units you don't mind leaving in combat and not finishing things off, because if they want to do Frenzy to fight in the hero phase, well, they could just teleport away before that happens.
Yep.
Okay, Evocators on Dracolines. I really like this unit because it's fast, right? Khorne is not a particularly fast army, and that any speed that you have means you can stay far away and still get the charges you want when you want them. Compare it to using a unit like Retributors, which have a 4-inch move. There's a very limited threat range, and odds are they're going to get charged first. But a unit that has good speed, they can be the charger. Now, what makes Dracolines particularly good in this role is they're a high-volume attacker. It's not a lot of rend, so as long as they're not hitting Blood Warriors, they're going to do just fine. They're great into Skullreapers, they're great into Bloodthirsters, they're great into a lot of different units in this army. But the mortal wounds after the fact, those are really good into everything, right? They're mortal wounds that aren't a spell. You'll be within melee range, so they can't use Locus of Fury. It gets through mortal wound. Like the mortal wounds don't trigger Murder Lust? No. Murder rolls, because murder rolls are only off melee weapons, so the lightning arc doesn't trigger those, which is great. Just all around all-star unit. Khorne, like if you have a pack of 6 Evocators on Dracolines with Storm Coven to make them strike first, I don't know what Khorne does into that. Like it's so hard to play into that because a Bloodthirster with strike first, that's not enough, right? So how does Khorne kill that unit?
I mean, they're fairly fragile, and they can like add up a lots of sources of damage. Like if you're close enough to them, they can do like Bloodbind, and then not Bloodbind, Blood Boil, and then a Brass Meteor. If you kill enough things, they'll add up damage from like 2 different units. Like Khorne has ways to take that down, but this is a very inconvenient unit for them to face because you're generating 2 for 1 value, and a lot of times like they're not even getting murder rolls off the value. And that's why I like Annihilators too, because from the drop mortal wounds and the charge mortal wounds, Khorne isn't going to be doing any murder rolls back to you, which is it's pretty key.
Yeah, it's a source of damage. It's not a spell, which is going to trigger Blood Tithe, but gets around all of their mechanics, which is cool.
I do like Evocators. The mortal wounds is nice. It's not much, but it is nice against like those smaller units because, unfortunately, Khorne generates Blood Tithe really fast, and they want you to kill those cheap chaff units to just farm Blood Tithe for their bigger hammer units. However, Evocators are still good to go kill like those like smaller units, or you could just honestly go bully like 5-man units with Evocators. Like don't be afraid. Do not be afraid to send Evocators in to go kill smaller units of Khorne. Like even with their shenanigans, you should still be able to pick them up. I used Evocators in my game. We were playing the Dread Spring to Trap, and I kind of used Evocators to essentially lock down one of the objectives, and just played cat and mouse with some of his units because he knew the Evocators could kill some of his smaller units, and he wasn't ready for me to kill his smaller units yet. So if you have faster moving stuff like Evocators, like definitely abuse their movement. Sometimes you just gotta outmove Khorne. There's not really much like to say about that.
Dracolines are an excellent unit to use on the flanks of your army, not necessarily with the main force, but you can put them off to the side, and they just own that side, right? There's very few units point for point that can compete with Evocators at that role. They're fast, they buff themselves, they have an unbind, which in this matchup it doesn't matter, but like they're a really good unit to put on the flanks, and that's a good thing to have in this matchup.
Yes.
Fulminators are another great unit in this matchup, right? Ren 2 is really good for punching through these 4-up save units or 3-up save on the Blood Warriors. Fulminators are also quite durable, relatively, right? They're 3-up save, 12 wounds per squad. You reinforce that, it's 24 wounds. But even just running a squad of 2 on a 3-up save, that's a tasty hammer unit. They do a lot of damage that can't be ignored. Like, if they're allowed to charge, they're going to hit a lot of stuff. Like, I've seen 2 Fulminators kill 6 or 7 Skullreapers in a single swing, right? They don't need to be reinforced to be super high impact. Because they're also a 3-up save, if you give them save bonuses, Mystic Shield, all the defense, things like that, they can just survive fighting a Fury Thirster with Halo of Blood, right? They don't have to do special pile-in tricks. They can just, it's not the greatest tactic, but in a pinch, the odds are in your favor here when you're on a 1+ and they have only Ren 2. So, not the worst idea, but they're also a Draconith unit. Which means they can score Draconith Destruction against so many units, right? You charge into 10 Skullreapers, or you charge into 10 Blood Reavers even. There's lots of things you could score that tactic off with this unit.
Mm-hmm.
Chariots. I am a big fan of Chariots in this matchup because they're just annoying. Like, if you're the Khorne player, these things are the most annoying unit to fight against because they take up a lot of space, right? And what Khorne wants to do is it wants to do like ping mortals here and there and then pile in around it and use their extra movement with Murder Lust to get special pile-ins. And the Chariot is just there. Until it's gone, it just stands in that spot. It doesn't lose any board space. And Khorne can't fly for the most part. Most of their units can't fly. So that huge amount of space being taken up by this annoying Chariot just really hinders their plan. It's also a 3-up save with 12 wounds, which is like, okay, that's not a joke for 150 points. And the 12-inch move is nice, right? If you're playing like a castle formation to avoid an aggressive turn 1 charge from something, fast movement on units like this are really useful for breaking out, taking objectives. And then the mortal wounds on the charge here. This is another source of like those mortal wounds we need to get through Blood Warriors, avoid murder rolls, punch more damage onto demons when they don't have their ward active. Like, charge mortals are really good into Khorne.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk shooting. I think these are the 3 shooting options you want in your list in some combination. Start off with Judicators with Boltstorm crossbows. They are very high volume shooting, 20 shots at 3s per 5 models. Like, some of that is also Ren 2 on the champion. That's 22 damage total. This high damage is really good for destroying screens and the lower save units. So even things like Skullreapers, this kind of profile from the Judicators is very, very useful. The problem is that it's 18-inch range, right? And if you're within 18 inches, there's a good chance you're about to be charged next turn, which means you need to bring screens. And if you're dropping those screens in front, that means they're going to be within 16 inches of an enemy. And that means they can be bloodbound. You can murder lust into range. There's all sorts of ways to deal with that. 18 range is not ideal for a unit that only shoots.
Yeah. Shooting is pretty necessary, like, overall against like Khorne, because, and honestly, like, I wish Lookouts wasn't a thing because most of the heroes tend to be foot heroes that you want gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is where this next unit would have come into play before the Lookouts are changed. Vanguard Raptors with long strike crossbows. They've got 30-inch range. They're super accurate. They can snipe out screens, and if you pump enough damage into the screens, they might lose Lookout Sir because this is not a super high unit count army, so sometimes you just put enough damage into a screen, like you Thunderbolt volley a screen, then the priest doesn't have Lookout Sir anymore, and boom, you can snipe him off next turn, or next in the shooting phase. Long strikes are super high accuracy, but their max damage is not good. For 230 points, you get 12 max damage per turn. Not ideal. And they are super fragile. So if you're not shooting as far away as possible, and if anything ever hits these guys, even a brass meteor sometimes can just swing and kill these guys. So that's something to watch out for. 6 wounds, really fragile. You don't want to feed your opponent Tithe. So they got to be played very carefully. But when they are played carefully, they're an absolutely amazing piece in this matchup. And my favorite unit right now are definitely the Tempesters. And this matchup in particular, they're just awesome. They've got a Mortal Wound Breath, potentially 2d3 mortal wounds, each one on a 4-up, and then 12 shots after you double 6, you get 12 on 3s, rend 1. So they are high volume. They've got mortal wounds to get through the stuff that has armor, and they also have decent melee attacks, and they're durable, right? So they are just high volume all across the board. They're able to charge in after shooting to finish things off. They have high volume damage, great for destroying screens. They can punish anything. Like, they're just a big threat for the Khorne player to deal with. I've been lately using squads of 6 in Hammers of Sigmar. You double reinforce the Tempesters, and that is a very tough unit for Khorne to deal with. Once you stick like a +1 save from Castellan and Mystic Shield on that unit, they have a real tough time dealing with all those wounds.
Yeah, Tempesters are pretty good. Even 4 of them for like their shooting and unleash hell value. I mean, Khorne does have ways to get past that with Murderlust, the unleash hell specifically, but a lot of like Tempesters just do a lot of damage, and the mortal wound breaths like also really like help get past like their defenses. So yeah, I mean, we've been standing Tempesters for a while now, but against Khorne and their relatively like low defense, unless you're fighting Blood Warriors, it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a battle report on our Discord server against Khorne, and a 4-block of Tempesters was just a huge threat for them to deal with. You drop a screen of Vanquishers up front, and then you drop Tempesters, so that they can unleash within 6 inches of the front line, but not within 3 inches, so they can't be tied down with a Murderlust. And that's like a lose-lose situation for Khorne. If they Murderlust in, they do nothing, and if they don't Murderlust in, they get Unleash Hell. And then they still just kill the screen and do nothing, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, they're Murderlusting into a screen, which is not what they want to be doing.
Yeah. It's so good to drop Tempesters with a screen in front, out of reserve.
Oh, Tempesters are your MVP against Khorne. Like, in some matchups when I was playing against Khorne, like, Tempesters did so much heavy lifting. Because going back to like the Evocators, like the ability to just engage and feint away with the Tempesters, as well as you could charge them in if you really need to clean something up. But I was just playing cat and mouse with my Tempesters, a 4-man block, just kind of kiting a lot of his units around the board, because I was like, you can't really reach me. I'm just gonna keep shooting at you, but you can't keep ignoring the Tempesters. And I think that's the best part about the Tempesters in that matchup is the 4-man is not a unit you can ignore. So they have to put some resources into those Tempestors while your rest of your hammers are still going around doing stuff. So do utilize some max range on your Tempesters, and like use also if you have good terrain, use that terrain. Like I was trying to do a lot of chokeholds with my Tempesters. Don't be afraid to be more aggressive with your Tempesters. Use all 420 points of that unit.
Yeah, especially armies like Khorne that can't fly, if you can just drop a unit of Liberators or Vanquishers or something in between 2 pieces of terrain, you'll often fill the gap between the terrain. Then you drop Tempesters behind them, and because they can't fly, there's just no way they can charge into your Tempesters, but you can still unleash hell. It's just a brutal combination. Like you put Khorne in a situation where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
Exactly.
So they end up having to over-invest resources, and that should give you a tactical advantage somewhere else on the table.
Correct. Depending also how your opponent plays. Depending how much you can spread them out thin. Tempesters also make good snipers, because you can't shoot heroes outside 12, but Tempesters don't care because we only have 12-inch shooting anyway. So,
yeah, and a lot of the Khorne heroes do not have good armor saves, so even Rend 1 is very good into them.
Yeah, so if you see an opening, like you just turn 2 or 3 where like things are starting to get more spread out, and maybe he made a mistake, even turn 1 or 2 or 2, like take advantage of the Tempesters. If you could shut down the Khorne's heroes, that's very, very big.
Yeah, we talked about how important it is to kill those heroes. Tempesters are very good at it because they can play on the front line. Like they're a shooting unit that goes on the front line, which is very different from most other shooting units in the game. All right, let's talk heroes. I think there's a few that really stand out in my mind. There's the usual, Lord Relictor is obviously a good choice into many matchups, but I think it's worth mentioning why they're good in this matchup in particular. So the first one I want to talk about is Gardas Steel Soul. Now, his 5-up ward, we've talked about how a 5-up ward is a 50% increase in effective health. That means the Khorne player needs to deal 50% more damage in order to kill your units. And Khorne doesn't really have the capacity, aside from the Bloodsecrator once per game, to just boost their damage and suddenly go kill mode, right? It's a low damage army like we've been talking about. And when you increase your effective health by 50%, boosting your army from like 100 wounds to 150, Khorne is going to have a much harder time taking pieces off the board. This slows down their Blood Tithe generation. This slows down their objective play. This might even stop them from scoring battle tactics. Now, obviously, the big problem with Gardas is that Khorne is one of the few armies that can just straight up disable wards. So you might be playing Hollow Knights, you might be bringing this expensive extra unit of Redeemers to fill battle line, and then you encounter the Argath King of Blades, which shuts off your wards, and you feel pretty stupid for spending that many points on it. So not required by any means to beat Khorne, but if you can avoid that anti-ward, if you can kill that Bloodthirster, for example, just focus a lot of damage on him early on, Gardas can carry you throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, I agree. I like also Gardas is really good at blocking those murder rolls too. Like if you get just spike really high, because Warhammer is a dice game at the end of the day, and you get those 5-ups, like it really feels bad if you're the Khorne player, because you kind of rely on those murder rolls to kind of make up for the damage that you might not have caused. So
yeah, Khorne is more reliant on their death abilities than an army like Stormcast would be. Like we have Blaze of Glory, which is it's a bad ability, right? Like it's weak and almost never does anything. When it does something, it's like cool bonus, because it only feels that way because Stormcast are a high damage army, right? Everything we do does so much damage that doing an extra 1 or 2 mortal wounds when we die isn't really that significant. But Khorne is not that high damage, right? So they need those murder rolls to go off. They need that additional damage to pump through. It's more significant to their damage profile.
Correct. Okay. Lord Relictor, I have been liking a priest. I actually been slotting in a priest now into my games. Those skulls and just their different invocations. It's nice to have a priest to kind of shut those off, and it's nice to have our prayers. Our prayers are pretty good, like Translocation, Blessed Weapons, Divine Light, whatever you like to use. So having a ability that you could kind of reliably go off like on a 2+ with the Relictor is nice, because you have to remember it only costs Khorne 2 Blood Tithe to just not let you get your spell off, but they can't do that for a prayer. So if you have room for a priest, I would recommend taking a priest. And Lord Relictor is also nice, and he's cost 20 points less now, so go crazy with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lord Relictor is the standout, obviously, right? Getting +1 to chanting is really good. He's also a totem, which is useful. The Knight Relictor deserves a shout out in this matchup, because we often forget that the Knight Relictor has abilities on his War Scroll, but he has a very special ability that is 4-up Ignore a Prayer on units wholly within 9 inches of the Knight Relictor. So if your units that you're keeping in range for Translocate, they're also going to be in range to ignore Khorne's prayers. So sometimes this means you can ignore the Invocations, but sometimes it means you can ignore a Bloodbind, and that probably seals the game, because the Khorne player, if you're playing carefully enough, the Khorne player has overextended in order to do this Bloodbind, and being able to just ignore it on a 4-up is just so gross. So Knight Relictor is a very, very good pick here. I probably wouldn't bring more than one. Like the 4-up ignore is nice, but it's not reliable enough. It's a bonus, right?
Yeah, he's officially doing his job now, and then some for 90 points.
Yeah. Yeah, the next hero I want to give a shout out to for this matchup in particular is the very humble Knight Vexillor, who has a once per game ability that deals D3 mortal wounds to all units within 6 inches of a point that is within 30 inches of this model. This does not require line of sight. This is not a spell. Khorne will just lose all their heroes if you bring 3 or more of these guys. And they're only 120 points, so you're looking at 360 points. And for the rest of the game, after they do the Meteor Blast, they just walk around and score battle tactics. Or they position so that they can do a call for aid later once your screen dies. And they can revive them onto an objective or something. They're a nice tactical piece. Think of them like, instead of spending 240 points on heroes, or instead of spending 240 points on Fulminators, you can spend 240 on 2 Knight Vexillors. And then you bring a 3rd Vexillor who's going to bring your Arcane Tome. And yeah, you feel pretty good about that use of points there. This is a good matchup. We call this type of archetype a Comet Fall, because the idea there is you do a lot of splash mortal wounds, and Knight Vexillors are key to that. I think Comet Fall plays very well into Khorne. Khorne doesn't have a high wound count, it doesn't have a high damage, it doesn't have reliably high threat ranges, so Comet Fall type lists can just deploy far away and nuke things down. And if you're curious for an example of this exact thing, check out our Discord server. I posted a battle report recently where I played against a Khorne player using Comet Fall, And it went exactly this way. I nuked some of his heroes early on, and then I played a careful, cagey game, and I didn't let him generate any Tithe, and I just turned the corner around round 3, and I pulled out a major win.
Yeah. If you guys are noticing a pattern here, it's starving your Khorne player from Blood Tithe. If that's probably bigger than actually just burthering their army half the time. Because they want you to kill their cheap stuff.
Yeah, they want their Blood Reavers to die, they want Claws of Karanak to die. Everything else in the army they want to live, but all the cheap stuff on the front line, they want that stuff to die. And because of Lookout Sir, it's really hard to use things like long strikes to snipe those heroes out. Tempesters often can't just drop in range in order to shoot them, and they don't have the movement to get up there. There's very few ways to hit the Khorne heroes off the bat, right? And that is the main way you cripple this army. That's the main way you're going to win this game, is if you kill their heroes early on before they get snowballed. And Night Vexillors are the best way to do it, because they can't be stopped. There's no line of sight required. It doesn't get blocked by the 5-up ward. It does get blocked by the 5-up ward, but not the 5-up spell ignore. It doesn't get blocked by Lookout Sir. There's very little the Khorne player can do except deploy very far away. But if they deploy that far away, they're doing nothing for 2 rounds, potentially. Definitely for at least 1 round. So it's a lose-lose scenario when you're playing Night Vexillors. For the Khorne player, it's a lose-lose scenario.
Then the Lord Castellant. Save stacking is always good, so it'll help in the Khorne matchup. And especially with Khorne, going back to they could deny your Mystic Shield with those 2 Blood Tithe, but they can't do anything about the Castellant's +1 save. So save stacking against Khorne is nice, because I don't think they generally have high amount of rent. It's just either making you take mortals, or it's just volume of dice. So being able to just have something big of your stuff just be on a 2+ save is massive against them. Definitely take advantage of Castellant. Should still feel like he should be 140, but that's a different.
I agree, story. But cost aside, his War Scroll is excellent in this matchup. As long as you have something, like a reinforced unit with a 3-up save, or something with 18 wounds and a 3-up save like Castellant, goes a long way in this matchup.
Correct.
Just make sure you dodge all the mortal wounds from Skarbrand.
Yeah.
And that'll do it for this video. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hopefully, you have a better understanding of what Khorne is trying to do, what their limits are, and what you can do to stop them. Thank you to all our viewers. I'm amazed you guys tune into the podcast. It's pretty amazing. I feel like we're just rambling here, and we hit record at some point, and people tune in, and that's amazing. Big thank you to our Patreon and YouTube supporters. You guys justify all the time that we waste putting all these slides and podcasts together. So thank you very much for your financial support. If you think we missed anything in this video, then please leave a comment down below. We read every single comment, and we do our best to respond to every single one. So we're looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Or feel free to come on to our Discord server and yell at us, on there. We're on there all day, every day. Probably spend too much time talking about Age of Sigmar, but it is what it is. We've got this fancy battle reports forum. You can see a cool battle report that I have against a Khorne player using a Cometfall list. Lots of people are posting their battle reports on there. Lots of detail goes into what our thought process is. If you've seen the video battle reports we've been doing for the channel, that's the kind of content we're putting, but in text form instead. You can post your models, work in progress, finished projects, talk all about the hobby side of things. We have our community contests. If you're watching this when the video goes live, right now we have a painting warbands contest. So if you have a painted Underworlds warband for Stormcast, or for Warcry, if you have the new if they have the new Quester Soulsworn, post them and you have a chance to win fabulous prizes. We also do list building for all armies, not just Stormcast Eternals, but we probably spend too much time building lists that never go anywhere. It's a fun exercise.
Yeah, thanks y'all for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Join the Discord. We do talk a lot of Stormcast in that all day, every day. If you're just trying to get better, it's really worth it.
Yeah, friendly community. It's just fun to hang out there. Consider supporting the gang by becoming a member on YouTube or joining us at patreon.com/thestormkeep. For $5 a month, you can get early access to our videos, and you can get access to the slides that we use in all these videos. Coming up next on the podcast, we are going to be looking at allies again, now that the Cities of Sigmar book is out. All the Order armies are finished for the 3rd edition, so we are going to update our old Stormcast allies video. After that, we're going to be taking a look at faction identities. I think once the Flesh Eater Courts Battle Tome, allegedly, there's going to be a Flesh Eater Courts Battle Tome. Once that's, it's like the worst kept secret ever. Once that book is out, we are going to update our old video on faction identities. This will be a comprehensive video covering every faction, what they're trying to do, and breaking down their strengths and weaknesses in a radar chart. And David and I are working on how to play Karazai, which should be probably the next video to be released on the show. So if you're looking to play Karazai, you want to play a big dragon and just smash things, but do it competitively, then you can look forward to that video. And more stuff as well. Too early to announce, but we are always cooking something up. So once again, from everybody on the Stormkeep, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
See y'all.